Nero Wolfe and the Pearl Smuggler. It was a Monday morning in early November, and the rain was doing that thing it does in New York when autumn decides to remind you that winter is coming, whether you're ready or not. I was at my desk in the office, updating the orchid germination records that Wolfe insisted be maintained with the precision of a Swiss watchmaker, when Fritz Brenner appeared in the doorway carrying a small wooden box and wearing an expression I'd learned to recognize over the years. Trouble had arrived at 918 West 35th Street. "Archie," he said quietly, "a messenger delivered this 10 minutes ago. It is addressed to Mr. Wolfe, marked urgent, and..." He hesitated. "It is quite heavy for its size, and there is a peculiar smell." I set down my pen. "Peculiar how? Explosives, dead fish, expensive perfume, salt water, and something else I cannot identify." Through the office windows, bulletproof, like all the windows in the brownstone since that unpleasant incident with the sniper 3 years ago, I could see the rain-slicked street and the occasional passing car. No suspicious vehicles, no loiterers, just Monday morning in Manhattan, wet and grey. Caesar appeared beside Fritz, the massive Doberman, moving with his characteristic silent authority. At 95 pounds of black and tan muscle, Caesar was the alpha of our 6-dog security system, and he took his responsibilities seriously. He sniffed the box Fritz held, his nose working methodically, then looked at me with an expression that suggested the box was interesting, but not immediately dangerous. "Caesar approves?" I asked. "He has made no objection, but he is observing carefully, as are the others." Mars joined us in the hallway, the second largest Doberman and the pack's enforcer. Unlike Caesar's measured evaluation, Mars radiated controlled aggression, ready to act if his alpha gave the signal. Behind him, I could see Apollo pacing near the rear entrance with his usual restless energy, and Minerva positioned herself on the second-floor landing, watching with her strategic intelligence. Loyal, our brick-red pit bull, padded into the office and took up position beside my desk. The white blaze on his chest caught the lamplight, and his hand-tooled leather collar made by Fritz with Loyal stamped into the leather and a brass plate engraved with our address gleamed softly. That dog had walked nearly 200 miles through wilderness to reach this address 2 years ago, carrying a murdered man's desperate plea for help. He'd earned his place here, and the 5 Dobermans had accepted him as family. "Bring it in," I said. "Let's see what's urgent enough to arrive by messenger on a rainy Monday morning." Fritz set the box on my desk. It was perhaps 8 inches square, made of polished teak, with brass corners, and a small brass plate on the lid, engraved with Chinese characters. The smell Fritz had mentioned was definitely present. Salt water, seaweed, and underneath it something organic and faintly unpleasant. I opened it carefully. Inside, nestled in rotting seaweed that had once been fresh but was now decomposing, lay a strand of pearls. Not costume jewelry, these were the real thing. Perhaps 40 pearls, each the size of a large pea, perfectly matched in size and color, with the kind of lustrous glow that suggested they'd been formed naturally rather than cultured in some Japanese pearl farm. They were strung on silk thread, and even in the grey morning light they seemed to capture and reflect illumination like tiny moons. Beneath the pearls was an envelope, also damp with seawater. I opened it and removed a single sheet of paper, typed on what looked like an expensive manual typewriter. "Mr. Wolfe, these pearls were taken from my husband's body 3 days ago when he was pulled from the East River. The police say he drowned, an accident, too much to drink, a stumble from the dock, but my husband didn't drink, Mr. Wolfe. He was afraid of water and never went near the docks alone, and he certainly didn't own pearls worth a fortune. Someone killed him. Someone put these pearls in his pocket to make it look like he was a thief who fell while running from a crime. But he wasn't a thief. He was an honest customs inspector who'd recently become very interested in pearl imports from the Middle East. I need you to find out who killed him and why. The police won't investigate further. They've closed the case. You're my only hope. Please help me, Mr. Wolfe. I'll pay whatever you ask. The pearls are yours, evidence or payment, whichever you prefer, but please find the truth. Mrs. Helen Baxter, 435 East 73rd Street." There was a phone number, Murray Hill, 53847. I read the letter twice, then examined the pearls more carefully. They were extraordinary, perfectly round, with that subtle pink undertone that suggested Persian Gulf origin. Each pearl had the characteristic orient, that iridescent quality that comes from layers of nacre built up over years. Natural pearls, definitely, worth thousands, possibly tens of thousands depending on provenance and market. And they'd been found in a dead man's pocket. Fritz was watching me with concern. This is a murder case, yes? Looks like it. Woman's husband fished out of the East River 3 days ago with a fortune in pearls in his pocket. Police called it an accidental drowning. She thinks otherwise. Will Mr. Wolfe accept? He won't want to. Jewelry cases bore him. Too much emphasis on valuation and authentication, not enough on human psychology. But the fee might convince him, and the fact that the cops have already closed the case will annoy him enough to pay attention. I heard Wolfe's elevator descending, precisely 11 o'clock, right on schedule. He emerged and navigated his 1/7 of a ton around the corner into the office with the careful deliberation of an ocean liner docking. He was wearing a yellow shirt that made his massive face look even more Buddha-like than usual, and his dark honey-colored eyes swept the room with their customary assessment before settling on the box on my desk. Archie, Fritz mentioned a delivery. A box containing approximately 40 natural pearls worth a small fortune, packed in rotting seaweed, sent by a widow whose husband was pulled from the East River 3 days ago, with these same pearls in his pocket. The cops called it accidental drowning. She thinks it was murder. She wants you to investigate. Wolfe settled into his chair with a sigh that suggested the universe was conspiring against his comfort. No, jewelry cases are tedious exercises in authentication and appraisal. I'm a detective, not a gemologist. The husband was a customs inspector investigating pearl imports. The widow says he didn't drink and was afraid of water, yet he supposedly got drunk and fell off a dock. The pearls were planted on his body to make it look like he was a thief. Someone went to considerable trouble to fake an accidental death and frame a dead man simultaneously. That's not tedious, that's interesting. It's presumptuous. Mrs. Baxter assumes murder based on her late husband's personal habits and her own certainty about his character. The police investigated and found no evidence of foul play. Why should I second-guess their conclusion? Because the pearls are worth a fortune, and customs inspectors don't usually carry fortunes in their pockets. Because someone competent enough to smuggle these into the country would also be competent enough to arrange a convenient death for an inspector who got too curious. And because Mrs. Baxter is offering whatever fee you want, which suggests she's either wealthy or desperate enough to pay everything she has. Wolfe picked up the strand of pearls, examined them briefly in the light from his desk lamp, then set them down with distaste. Natural pearls, Persian Gulf, most likely. 42 matched specimens, each between 7 and 8 millimeters. Current market value perhaps $12,000 to $15,000, depending on authentication and buyer. Smuggling them would avoid import duties of approximately 35%, making the operation profitable if done at scale. You know a lot about pearls for someone who finds jewelry cases tedious. I know a great deal about many things I find tedious, Archie. That's the burden of education and a functional memory. He pressed his button. Fritz, beer please, and inform Mrs. Baxter. He glanced at the letter, that I'll see her at 3 o'clock this afternoon. Tell her to bring any documentation her husband left regarding his customs investigation, any personal effects found with his body, and any information about his activities in the week before his death. After Fritz departed, I looked at Wolfe. You're taking the case? Just like that? I'm hearing what Mrs. Baxter has to say. If her husband's death was accidental, I'll tell her so and decline to waste her money. If it was murder, the fee will be substantial enough to justify the tedium of investigating pearl smuggling. He picked up the strand again, holding it up to catch light. Though I admit, Archie, there's something aesthetically satisfying about pearls. They're nature's response to irritation. A grain of sand becomes a thing of beauty through layers of nacre secreted over years. It's almost metaphorical. Metaphorical for what? For detective work, we take irritating crimes and through layers of investigation, we create something beautiful. Truth. He set the pearls down. Or perhaps I'm being fanciful. Call Inspector Kramer. Ask him about the Baxter drowning. I want to know why the police closed the case so quickly. I called Kramer's office at Homicide. His secretary said he was in a meeting, but would call back within the hour. While waiting, I examined the wooden box more carefully. The Chinese characters on the brass plate were beyond my linguistic abilities, but the craftsmanship was excellent. Dovetailed corners, precise brass fittings, a small lock that had been forced open at some point. The pearls themselves lay on my desk like an accusation. Beautiful, valuable, and connected to a dead man pulled from the East River. Someone had killed for these pearls, or killed to protect whatever smuggling operation they represented, or killed to silence a customs inspector who'd gotten too curious about where 42 perfectly matched natural pearls came from, and who was bringing them into New York. The phone rang. I answered. "Goodwin." "Archie, it's Kramer. What do you want to know about the Baxter case?" "Everything. Widow thinks her husband was murdered. You apparently think otherwise." "Baxter, Thomas Baxter, 43, customs inspector at the port of New York, found floating in the East River near Pier 42 last Friday morning by dock workers. Body had been in the water approximately 8 to 12 hours based on lividity and water temperature. Blood alcohol level 0.12, legally drunk. Pockets contained wallet, keys, pocket watch, and a strand of natural pearls valued at approximately $14,000. No signs of trauma beyond what you'd expect from a body bouncing against pilings. Medical examiner ruled accidental drowning, probably fell from the dock while intoxicated. And the pearls? Initially thought they might be stolen. We checked reports, but nothing matched. Then we figured Baxter was either smuggling them himself or had confiscated them from a smuggler and pocketed them instead of reporting them. Either way, he was dirty. Case closed.
Did you investigate the smuggling angle? Find out where the pearls came from, who might have brought them in?
Archie, we're homicide, not customs enforcement. Guy drowns with contraband in his pocket. That's his problem. We documented the pearls, returned them to his widow, closed the case. We've got actual murders to investigate. People who were provably killed by other people, not customs inspectors who got greedy and drunk and fell in the river. His widow says he didn't drink. Widows say a lot of things about their dead husbands. Most of it's wishful thinking or deliberate ignorance. Blood alcohol doesn't lie. Baxter was drunk, and he drowned. End of story. You're sure there was no trauma? No sign he was knocked unconscious before going in the water? Me checked thoroughly. No skull fractures, no defensive wounds, no ligature marks, no signs of struggle, just a drunk guy who fell in the river and couldn't swim well enough to save himself. It happens, Archie. Not every death is a murder. After hanging up, I relayed the conversation to Wolfe. He listened without expression, occasionally sipping his beer. Kramer's reasoning is superficially sound, he said when I finished. A man found drowned with evidence of intoxication and no signs of violence. The pearls suggest either smuggling or theft, both of which cast doubt on the deceased's character. The police chose the simplest explanation, accidental death of a man engaged in criminal activity. Efficient, economical, and probably wrong. Because competent smugglers don't get drunk and fall in rivers with their contraband. They're careful, methodical, and risk-averse. If Baxter was smuggling pearls, he wouldn't carry them openly in his pocket while drinking near the docks. And if he confiscated them from a smuggler, he'd hide them somewhere secure until he could determine how to profit from them. Wolfe set down his glass. No, Archie, if Baxter had those pearls in his pocket when he died, someone put them there after his death. The question is whether he was killed because of the pearls, or for some other reason, with the pearls planted to obscure the motive. How do you fake intoxication in a drowning victim? You force alcohol down his throat after death, but before rigor mortis sets in. The alcohol enters the bloodstream through the stomach lining. Post-mortem alcohol absorption is less efficient than ante-mortem, but sufficient alcohol will produce a measurable blood alcohol level. The medical examiner assumes the victim was drunk when he drowned because that's the most common scenario. It would take a suspicious May to test for post-mortem alcohol administration, and most don't bother if the drowning otherwise appears accidental. So someone killed Baxter, maybe strangled him or knocked him unconscious, poured whiskey down his throat, put the pearls in his pocket, and dumped him in the East River to make it look like a drunken accident. Possibly. We'll know more after speaking with Mrs. Baxter. Wolfe picked up the pearls again, studying them with what might have been appreciation or distaste. With Wolfe it was often hard to tell. These pearls tell a story, Archie. They came from the Persian Gulf, were smuggled into New York to avoid import duties, and somehow became connected to a dead customs inspector. Understanding that story will lead us to whoever killed Thomas Baxter. Assuming he was killed. He was killed. The pearls guarantee it. No smuggler abandons $14,000 in merchandise with a corpse unless the corpse serves a purpose. Baxter's body was meant to be found with those pearls, creating a narrative of corruption and greed that would satisfy the police without prompting deeper investigation. It almost worked. Except his widow knows better. Except his widow knows better. Wolfe set the pearls down carefully, which suggests Mrs. Baxter knew her husband well enough to recognize the narrative doesn't fit the man. We'll see if her certainty is justified or merely the wishful thinking Kramer suggested. At precisely 3 o'clock, the doorbell rang. Through the window, I could see a woman on the stoop, mid-30s, dressed in a conservative dark suit, carrying a leather briefcase. She looked composed but tired, with the particular exhaustion that comes from grief, held at bay through sheer willpower. Caesar and Mars examined her through the window, recognized no immediate threat, and allowed me to open the door without interference. "Mrs. Baxter?" "Yes. Mr. Goodwin?" "Come in. Mr. Wolfe is expecting you." She entered with the careful dignity of someone who'd recently learned that the world could be cruel and random. The dogs assessed her, Caesar with his quiet authority, Mars with controlled intensity. Loyal stood as she passed my desk, his intelligent eyes tracking her movements, but he remained calm. "You have guard dogs," she said, not quite a question. 6 of them, 5 Doberman Pinschers and 1 American Pit Bull Terrier. They're trained professionals, not pets. They won't bother you unless you give them reason, but don't try to pet them or make sudden movements. She nodded, her attention caught briefly by Loyal. "That pit bull, he has an unusual face, like he's been through something. He walked 200 miles to bring us a case 2 years ago. His owner was murdered, and the dog carried the message for help all the way from upstate New York to this address. We solved the murder, and he stayed. He's part of the family now." "That's extraordinary." She looked at Loyal with something like kinship. "My husband would have appreciated that story. He believed in loyalty above almost everything else." I showed her into the office. Wolfe had positioned the strand of pearls on his desk where she could see them, and he gestured to the red leather chair. "Mrs. Baxter, please sit. I've read your letter and examined the pearls. I have questions." She sat, her hands folded in her lap, her eyes on the pearls. Those were in Thomas's pocket when they found him. "The police say he was smuggling them or had stolen them. They're wrong, Mr. Wolfe. My husband was the most honest man I've ever known. He wouldn't smuggle contraband any more than he'd rob a bank." "Tell me about his work at customs. What did he inspect?" "Shipping manifests, primarily. He worked at Pier 42, processing cargo declarations for ships arriving from the Middle East and Asia. He'd been in customs for 18 years, started as a clerk, worked his way up to senior inspector. He knew every trick smugglers used, every way to hide contraband in legitimate cargo." "Was he investigating pearl smuggling specifically?" "Not officially, but about 2 months ago, he mentioned that several ships from the Persian Gulf had declared pearl shipments with suspiciously low valuations. He said the manifests claimed the pearls were cultured pearls from Japanese farms, but the quantities and sources didn't match. He thought someone was bringing in natural pearls disguised as cultured ones to avoid the higher import duties." "Did he report this to his superiors?" "He tried. His supervisor, a man named Arthur Kellerman, told him to stop wasting time on speculation and focus on his assigned duties. Thomas said Kellerman seemed uncomfortable with the whole subject, like he wanted it dropped immediately." Wolfe's eyebrows rose slightly, suggesting Supervisor Kellerman might be complicit in the smuggling operation. Thomas thought so. He started documenting the suspicious shipments on his own time, keeping copies of manifests, photographing cargo, recording which importers consistently underdeclared values. He said he was building a case to take directly to the Treasury Department, bypassing Kellerman entirely. "Did he tell anyone else about this investigation?" "Just me, and possibly." She hesitated. "There was an appraiser he consulted sometimes, a man named Leonard Driscoll, who runs an estate jewelry business on Maiden Lane. Thomas said Driscoll was one of the few honest pearl dealers in New York, someone who could authenticate natural versus cultured pearls reliably. He might have asked Driscoll for help identifying the smuggled pearls." "When did your husband last see Mr. Driscoll?" "The week before he died. Thomas came home late one night, maybe 10 o'clock, and said he'd been at Driscoll's shop, examining some pearl samples. He seemed excited, said he'd confirmed his suspicions about the smuggling operation, and just needed a few more pieces of evidence before going to the Treasury Department. And 3 days later, he was dead." "Yes." Her voice was steady, but her hands tightened in her lap. Thursday night, he said he had to go to the docks to check something. He left around 8 o'clock. I never saw him alive again. Friday morning, the police came to tell me they'd found his body in the river. Wolfe picked up the pearls. Mrs. Baxter, these are natural pearls of exceptional quality, worth approximately $14,000. If your husband was investigating pearl smuggling and was killed for that investigation, why would the killers leave $14,000 in evidence with his body? To make him look corrupt, to make the police think he was a dirty customs inspector who got drunk and fell in the river. They knew the police wouldn't investigate a corrupt official's death thoroughly. They'd close the case and move on. It's exactly what happened. It's a sophisticated plan. Whoever killed your husband understood police procedures, knew how to fake accidental drowning, and was willing to sacrifice valuable contraband to protect their operation. That suggests organization and resources. Can you find them, Mr. Wolfe? Can you prove Thomas was murdered? I can determine the truth, Mrs. Baxter. If your husband was murdered, I'll identify his killers and provide evidence sufficient for prosecution. If his death was accidental despite your certainty otherwise, I'll tell you that as well. My fee is $10,000 plus expenses. I require a retainer of $5,000 immediately, the balance upon resolution of the case. She opened her briefcase and removed a checkbook. I'll pay the full $10,000 now. I don't want money to be an obstacle to finding the truth. After she'd written the check, her hand steady despite the circumstances, she produced a folder containing photocopies of shipping manifests, photographs of cargo containers, and pages of handwritten notes in what I assumed was Thomas Baxter's writing. This is everything Thomas kept at home regarding his investigation. The police didn't want it. They said it was irrelevant to an accidental drowning. But I thought you might find it useful. Wolfe accepted the folder. I'll examine these carefully. Mrs. Baxter, I need you to answer one more question honestly. Was your husband afraid? In the days before his death, did he seem worried or threatened? She was silent for a moment. Then, yes, the last few days, he was cautious. He'd check our apartment before entering, look over his shoulder when we walked. Tuesday night, he made me promise that if anything happened to him, I'd take his documentation to the Treasury Department and demand an investigation. I asked what he meant, and he said some people didn't want him looking too closely at their business. He said he'd be careful, but I should know what to do if he couldn't finish what he'd started. And you believe anything happened to him on Thursday night? I know it did, Mr. Wolfe. My husband didn't drink. He didn't go to the docks alone at night, and he certainly didn't carry smuggled pearls in his pocket. Someone killed him to stop his investigation. I need you to prove it. After she left, escorted to the door by Fritz, assessed and dismissed as non-threatening by the dogs, Wolfe sat in silence for several minutes, studying the folder of documentation. Archie, he said finally, tomorrow you'll visit Leonard Driscoll's jewelry shop on Maiden Lane. I want to know what Thomas Baxter showed him, what conclusions they reached, and whether Driscoll has received any threats or pressure since Baxter's death. Then you'll go to Pier 42 and examine the customs office where Baxter worked. I want to know about Supervisor Kellerman, his background, his financial situation, his reputation among other customs inspectors. You're convinced Baxter was murdered. I'm convinced the narrative doesn't fit the evidence. A customs inspector investigating pearl smuggling dies under suspicious circumstances with pearls in his pocket. His supervisor discouraged the investigation. His widow reports he was frightened in the days before his death. The police closed the case within hours of finding the body. That's not accident, Archie. That's murder disguised as accident, and we're going to prove it. He reached for his button. Fritz, we'll have striped bass for dinner tonight. Prepared simply. The fish should speak for itself, not be overwhelmed by sauce. And Archie, he looked at me, bring your gun tomorrow. If Thomas Baxter's investigation threatened a smuggling operation large enough to kill for protection, then our investigation will face similar threats. The brownstone is secure, but outside these walls, you're vulnerable. I checked my .38 in the desk drawer, made sure it was loaded, and returned it to its place. The case of the Pearl Smuggler had begun. And somewhere in New York at the docks in the Pearl District, or in some office where shipping manifests were falsified, and customs inspectors were eliminated when they got too curious, a killer was about to discover that murdering Thomas Baxter hadn't ended the investigation. It had just transferred it to someone considerably more dangerous than an honest customs inspector. Nero Wolfe didn't travel to crime scenes. He didn't need to. He solved murders from his chair, and this murder disguised as accident, protected by corruption, hidden behind $14,000 in pearls, was about to be exposed by a seventh of a ton of genius who refused to leave his brownstone. The pearls sat on Wolfe's desk, catching light. Beautiful, valuable, and stained with murder. Tuesday morning I was in a taxi heading downtown to Maiden Lane, which has been the heart of New York's jewelry trade since before the Civil War. The rain had stopped overnight, leaving the city washed clean and sparkling in November sunshine that wouldn't last past noon. I had Baxter's folder of documentation, my notebook, my .38, and a healthy respect for the fact that I was investigating a smuggling operation that had already killed one person. Loyal had wanted to come along. He'd positioned himself by the door when I grabbed my coat, his expression suggesting that detective work was better done in pairs. But I'd left him with Caesar and the others to guard the brownstone. 6 professional guard dogs were more security than most fortresses could boast. Maiden Lane was a narrow street lined with jewelry shops, watch repair stores, and small offices where dealers conducted business away from retail customers. The buildings were old, some dating to the 1800s, and gave the street a European quality that felt transplanted from Amsterdam or Antwerp. Leonard Driscoll's shop was halfway down the block, wedged between a watch repair store and a shop selling antique silverware. The window display was understated, a few carefully arranged pieces on dark velvet, nothing ostentatious. A discreet brass plaque beside the door read, L. Driscoll & Sons, Estate Jewelry, by appointment. I tried the door, locked. I rang the bell. After perhaps 30 seconds, the door opened 6 inches, revealing a man in his 60s wearing an eyepiece lamp on a chain around his neck and an expression of professional skepticism. "We're by appointment only," he said. "If you're selling, I'm not interested. If you're buying, call ahead." I showed him my identification. Archie Goodwin, working for Nero Wolfe. "I'm investigating the death of Thomas Baxter. I understand he consulted with you about pearl authentication." The skepticism shifted to something more complicated. Concern, maybe, or wariness. "Baxter's dead. Drowned in the East River last week. Police said it was an accident. His widow thinks otherwise. She hired Wolfe to investigate. You going to make me stand on the street, or can we talk inside?" He studied me for a moment longer, then stepped aside. "Inside. But I don't know anything about Baxter's death. I just looked at some pearls for him." The shop's interior was exactly what you'd expect from a high-end estate jewelry dealer. Thick carpet, dark wood cases with glass tops, excellent lighting, and the kind of hushed atmosphere that suggested serious money changed hands here regularly. The back half of the shop was Driscoll's workshop, jewelers' benches, tools, microscopes, and various authentication equipment. Driscoll locked the door behind me and gestured to a leather chair near his desk. He was thin, precisely dressed, with the steady hands of someone who'd spent decades working with valuable, fragile things. "What do you want to know?" he asked, settling behind his desk. "Everything. Start with when Baxter first contacted you." "About 6 weeks ago. He called, said he was a customs inspector investigating possible pearl smuggling and needed an expert who could authenticate natural versus cultured pearls. He'd heard I was honest." A slight smile, which in the pearl trade is apparently noteworthy. I agreed to help. "What did he show you?" "Initially, nothing. He described what he'd observed in shipping manifests, large quantities of pearls declared as cultured Japanese pearls, arriving from Persian Gulf ports. He said the quantities didn't match Japanese production capacity, and the shipping routes were suspicious. He wanted to know if I could confirm whether specific pearls were natural or cultured if he brought me samples. Could you? Yes, natural pearls have a different internal structure than cultured pearls. Under X-ray, you can see the difference. Natural pearls form in concentric layers around a random irritant. Cultured pearls form around a deliberately inserted nucleus. It's not always easy to tell, but with good equipment, I can authenticate with reasonable certainty. Did Baxter bring you samples? Driscoll hesitated, his fingers drumming on the desk. This is where it gets complicated, Mr. Goodwin. Yes, Baxter brought me samples, but I need to understand something first. Are you trying to get me arrested for handling smuggled merchandise? I'm trying to find out who killed Thomas Baxter. What you tell me stays between us, unless it's directly relevant to murder. I'm not interested in prosecuting a jewelry dealer who helped a customs inspector investigate smuggling. All right. 3 weeks ago, Baxter came here late in the evening. After the shop was closed, he brought 6 pearls in a small cloth bag. He said they'd been confiscated from a shipment that claimed to be cultured pearls from Japan, but had actually originated in Bahrain. He wanted me to authenticate them and estimate their value. And they were natural pearls, Persian Gulf origin, based on the nacre characteristics. Exceptional quality, each one worth perhaps $500 to $800 retail. He said he'd confiscated them from a much larger shipment, maybe 2,000 pearls total, which meant someone was smuggling natural pearls worth over $1 million disguised as cheap cultured pearls. I did the math. $1 million in merchandise, avoiding 35% import duties, meant the smuggling operation was saving $350,000 per shipment. If they were bringing in multiple shipments per year, the operation was worth well over $1 million annually. Did Baxter say who was smuggling them? He mentioned several import companies, but one name came up repeatedly: Maritime Imports Limited. He said their manifests consistently underdeclared pearl values, and they had relationships with shipping companies that gave them priority customs processing. He thought someone at customs was facilitating the smuggling by expediting their shipments through inspection. His supervisor, Arthur Kellerman. Baxter didn't say that explicitly, but yes, I got the impression Kellerman was involved. Baxter said he'd tried to report the smuggling through normal channels and had been told to drop it. That's why he was documenting everything privately. Did he seem frightened? Driscoll nodded slowly. The last time I saw him, which was the Tuesday before he died, he was definitely worried. He said he'd gathered enough evidence to take to the Treasury Department, but he wanted one more confirmation. He'd acquired a sample from a recent shipment and wanted me to authenticate it and photograph the internal structure as proof. Did he have the sample with him? Yes, a single pearl, approximately 9 millimeters, larger than the others he'd shown me. Exceptional quality, worth perhaps $2,000. I x-rayed it, confirmed it was natural, took detailed photographs for his documentation. He seemed satisfied, said he'd take everything to Treasury by the end of the week. What happened to that pearl? He took it with him when he left, said he'd return it to the evidence locker at customs so there'd be no question about chain of custody. Driscoll's expression darkened. 2 days later, he was dead. And Mr. Goodwin, that pearl he showed me, it wasn't among the pearls the police found in his pocket. I saw the police photographs in the newspaper. The pearls they found were all 7 to 8 millimeters. The 9 millimeter pearl wasn't there, which means either Baxter returned it to the evidence locker before he died, or whoever killed him took it. Or it's still wherever Baxter hid his documentation. He was careful, Mr. Goodwin. He knew he was threatening a major smuggling operation. He wouldn't have kept all his evidence in one place. I made notes. Has anyone contacted you since Baxter's death? Threats, warnings, unusual visitors? No threats, but Friday afternoon, the day after Baxter's body was found, a man came to the shop, said he was from Maritime Imports Limited, interested in purchasing estate pearls for resale. He asked a lot of questions about my authentication methods, whether I worked with customs officials, whether I'd recently examined any Persian Gulf pearls. I told him I couldn't discuss client business. He left, but the whole conversation felt like an interrogation disguised as a sales call. Describe him. 40s, well-dressed, expensive suit, dark hair, clean-shaven, spoke with a slight accent. Middle Eastern, I think, though his English was perfect. He gave me a business card. Driscoll pulled a card from his desk drawer and handed it over. The card was simple, expensive stock, engraved rather than printed. Maritime Imports Limited. Karim Al-Rashid, Director of Acquisition. Water Street, New York. 40s 2, Water Street, New York. Bowling Green 6-29. Did Al-Rashid seem threatening? Not overtly, but there was something about him, a sense that he was evaluating me, determining whether I was a problem that needed handling. After he left, I made sure my doors were locked, and I've been more careful about who I let in the shop. Smart. One more question. Who else in the pearl trade would know about this smuggling operation? Who else might Baxter have contacted? Driscoll considered. There are maybe a dozen serious pearl dealers in New York. Most of them would recognize natural pearls disguised as cultured if they examined samples carefully. But whether they'd report it, he shrugged. The pearl trade has always existed in a gray area. Some dealers ask questions about provenance, others don't. If you wanted information about who moves large quantities of Persian Gulf pearls through New York, you'd want to talk to Bernard Holloway. Who's he? Runs an auction house specializing in estate jewelry. Holloway and Associates on East 57th Street. He handles more high-end pearls than anyone else in the city, and he's connected to collectors, museums, and dealers internationally. If Maritime Imports is selling smuggled pearls, Holloway would probably know about it, even if he's not directly involved. I thanked Driscoll, took his card, and headed back outside. The sunshine had already faded to grey overcast. I'd been right about it not lasting past noon. Maritime Imports Limited. Karim Al-Rashid, Arthur Kellerman, Bernard Holloway. The cast of characters was expanding, and somewhere in that expansion was the person who'd killed Thomas Baxter. I caught a taxi to Pier 4. The Port of New York's customs facilities at Pier 42 were a maze of warehouses, loading docks, and administrative offices where cargo from dozens of ships was processed daily. I found the customs inspection office on the second floor of a building that smelled of salt water, diesel fuel, and the particular bureaucratic staleness that comes from too many forms being processed in too little space. The office was maybe 40 feet square, filled with desks, filing cabinets, and customs inspectors working through manifest paperwork. A receptionist directed me to Arthur Kellerman's private office in the back corner. Kellerman was perhaps 50, running slightly to fat, with the fussy manner of a career bureaucrat who discovered that rules could be bent for profit. He looked up from his paperwork when I entered, his expression shifting from annoyance to professional courtesy. "Can I help you?" "Archie Goodwin. I'm investigating Thomas Baxter's death on behalf of his widow. I have a few questions about his work here." The professional courtesy vanished. "Baxter drowned. Accidental death. Police closed the case. What's there to investigate?" "His widow doesn't believe it was an accident. She hired my employer, Nero Wolfe, to determine the truth. We're examining Baxter's recent work, particularly his investigation into pearl smuggling." Kellerman's face reddened. Baxter wasn't investigating anything. He was a customs inspector who did his assigned duties. If he told his wife he was conducting some kind of crusade, he was fantasizing or looking for attention. So he didn't report suspicions about underdeclared pearl shipments. He mentioned it once. I told him to focus on his job and stop inventing conspiracies. Customs inspectors process manifests, not conduct investigations. If he had concerns about specific shipments, he should have documented them through proper channels. He tried. You shut him down. I told him to follow procedures. There's a difference. Kellerman stood, making it clear the conversation was ending. "Mr. Goodwin, Thomas Baxter was a competent inspector who apparently developed some paranoid theories about smuggling. He also apparently had a drinking problem we weren't aware of, which led to his death. That's tragic, but it's not a conspiracy. If his widow wants to waste money hiring private detectives, that's her business, but I don't have time for this nonsense. Just one more question. Do you know Karim Al-Rashid or Maritime Imports Limited?" Kellerman's expression froze for just a second, barely perceptible, but enough. "Maritime Imports is one of hundreds of companies we process shipments for. I don't know their personnel personally. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have work to do." I left, but not before noting that Kellerman's desk had a framed photograph showing him on what looked like an expensive yacht, wearing clothes that suggested a lifestyle well beyond a customs supervisor's salary. Outside the office, I stopped one of the other inspectors, a young guy, maybe 30, who'd been watching my conversation with Kellerman with interest. "Got a minute?" I asked quietly. He glanced toward Kellerman's office, then nodded. "Outside. I'm on break anyway." We walked to the pier, where cargo containers were being unloaded, and the East River stretched grey and cold toward Brooklyn. "What's your name?" I asked. "Peter Kowalski. I worked with Tom Baxter for 3 years. He was a good guy, taught me a lot about spotting false manifests. You think his death was an accident?" Kowalski lit a cigarette, stared at the water. "Tom didn't drink. Everyone here knew that he was almost obnoxious about it, always ordering soda at office parties, making jokes about being the designated driver. So when the cops said he drowned drunk, we all knew something was wrong, but nobody wanted to say it out loud. Why not? Because Tom was right about the pearl smuggling, and some of us knew it. We'd seen the same shipments he was documenting, Maritime Imports bringing in cultured pearls that didn't match the declared values or origins. But Kellerman made it clear we weren't supposed to question certain companies. He'd expedite their shipments, sign off on manifests without detailed inspection, and if anyone asked questions, they'd get reassigned to less desirable duties. Kellerman's taking bribes from maritime imports. I can't prove that, but yeah, that's the assumption. He lives in a place in Westchester that costs more than he makes in 5 years. He drives a new Cadillac. He takes expensive vacations, and he's very protective of certain import companies. Would he kill to protect that arrangement? Kowalski's cigarette paused halfway to his mouth. Kill? I don't know, man. Kellerman's a bureaucrat and a crook. But murder? That seems extreme. So did killing a customs inspector to protect a smuggling operation worth over $1 million a year. He finished his cigarette in silence, then dropped it into the river. If you're asking me whether Kellerman could have arranged Tom's death, I'd say it's possible. But he wouldn't have done it himself. He'd have made a call, told someone that Baxter was becoming a problem, and let them handle it. Someone like Karim al-Rashid. Don't know the name. But whoever runs maritime imports, yeah. They'd have the resources and the motivation. I thanked Kowalski and headed back to the street. It was nearly 2 o'clock, and I needed to report to Wolfe before he started dinner preparation. He hated being interrupted once Fritz began cooking. The case was taking shape. Thomas Baxter had investigated a pearl smuggling operation run by Maritime Imports Limited, with cooperation from Arthur Kellerman. Baxter had documented the smuggling, authenticated samples with Leonard Driscoll's help, and was preparing to take everything to the Treasury Department. Someone probably connected to Maritime Imports had killed him to stop that report, faked the drowning to look accidental, and planted pearls on his body to destroy his credibility. The question was who specifically had killed him, and how to prove it. I caught a taxi back to the brownstone, running through the evidence in my mind. Somewhere in this city, a smuggling operation was moving millions of dollars in pearls through false manifests and corrupt customs officials. And somewhere, a killer was hoping Thomas Baxter's death would be the end of the investigation. They were about to discover they'd made a serious miscalculation, because Nero Wolfe had accepted the case. And Wolfe didn't stop until truth emerged from obscurity, like a pearl from an oyster, layer by layer, irritation by irritation, until something beautiful and undeniable appeared. Justice. I returned to the brownstone at 3:30 to find Wolfe in the office, examining Baxter's documentation, with the focused intensity he reserved for problems that genuinely interested him. The strand of pearls sat on his desk beside a magnifying glass and several reference books on gemology that he'd apparently had Fritz retrieve from the library upstairs. Caesar and Mars were at their posts by the front entrance. Loyal was under my desk, and he stood when I entered, tail wagging once in greeting before settling back down. The other dogs were positioned throughout the brownstone, Apollo at the rear, Minerva on the stairs, Diana in the basement. The fortress was secure. Results? Wolfe asked without looking up from the manifest he was studying. I gave him the complete account. Driscoll's authentication of Baxter's pearl samples, the mention of Maritime Imports Limited, and Karim al-Rashid, Kellerman's obvious involvement in the smuggling operation, and Peter Kowalski's confirmation that Baxter had been right about everything. Wolfe listened without interruption, occasionally making notes on a pad. When I finished, he set down the manifest and picked up the strand of pearls. Maritime Imports Limited is the key, he said. According to Baxter's documentation, they've imported pearl shipments from Bahrain, Dubai, and Kuwait at least 20 times in the past year. Each shipment declared as cultured pearls with valuations between $5,000 and $10,000. But if Driscoll's authentication is accurate, and I have no reason to doubt a reputable dealer's expertise, those shipments actually contained natural pearls worth 10 to 20 times the declared value. How much total? Conservatively, $2 to $3 million in pearls imported over 12 months, avoiding approximately $700,000 in import duties. That's sufficient motivation for murder, Archie. People kill for far less. So Maritime Imports is smuggling natural pearls disguised as cultured pearls. Kellerman expedites the shipments through customs without proper inspection, and they split the savings from avoided import duties. Baxter discovered the operation, documented it, and was killed before he could report to Treasury. Essentially, yes, though I suspect the operation is more sophisticated than simple customs evasion. Natural pearls of this quality, he held up the strand, have a limited market. You can't simply sell $2 million worth of pearls through ordinary retail channels without attracting attention. Someone is distributing these smuggled pearls to collectors, auction houses, and high-end dealers who either don't ask questions about provenance or actively participate in the deception. Driscoll mentioned Bernard Holloway runs an auction house on East 57th Street that handles estate jewelry. He said Holloway moves more high-end pearls than anyone in New York. Then tomorrow you'll visit Mr. Holloway and determine whether he's a knowing participant in the smuggling operation or merely an innocent dealer who's purchased smuggled merchandise without realizing its provenance. Either way, he can provide information about who in New York is buying Persian Gulf natural pearls. What about Karim al-Rashid? He visited Driscoll's shop the day after Baxter's body was found, asking questions that sounded like he was checking whether Driscoll was a threat to the operation. Al-Rashid is probably Maritime Imports operational manager, the person who coordinates the smuggling, manages relationships with corrupt officials like Kellerman, and eliminates problems when they arise. Whether he personally killed Baxter or ordered someone else to do it, he's certainly involved in the murder. So we need to prove Al-Rashid killed Baxter and connect him to the smuggling operation in a way that satisfies the police and prosecutors. Exactly, which requires evidence beyond Baxter's documentation and witness testimony. We need financial records showing payments to Kellerman, shipping records proving the pearls were misdeclared, and ideally direct testimony from someone inside the operation willing to cooperate in exchange for leniency. The phone rang. I answered. Goodwin residence. Mr. Goodwin, this is Leonard Driscoll. We spoke this morning about Thomas Baxter. I remember. What's happened? Someone broke into my shop last night. I just discovered it. I was working late in my workshop and didn't notice until I went to lock the front door. They forced the rear entrance, searched my office and workshop thoroughly, but didn't take any merchandise. They were looking for something specific. Baxter's documentation. The photographs you took of the 9mm pearl. That's my assumption. They didn't find them. I keep sensitive materials in a safe deposit box at my bank, not in the shop. But Mr. Goodwin, whoever did this knew what they were looking for. They ignored thousands of dollars in jewelry and focused on paperwork. That's not a random burglary. Did you call the police? Not yet. I wanted to talk to you first. If I report this, I'll have to explain what was being searched for, which means revealing my work with Baxter. I don't know if that's safe. I covered the mouthpiece and relayed the conversation to Wolfe. He thought for a moment, then nodded. Tell Mr. Driscoll to report the burglary to police, but to omit any mention of Baxter or pearl authentication. Simply report that someone broke in, searched the premises, and left without taking merchandise. That establishes a record without exposing him to additional danger. Then tell him to take vacation, close his shop for a week, leave the city if possible. The people who broke in will probably try again, and next time they might use more direct methods of persuasion. I relayed this to Driscoll. He agreed, though his voice suggested he wasn't happy about being run out of his own shop by criminals. After hanging up, I looked at Wolfe. They are escalating. Breaking into Driscoll's shop means they know Baxter consulted with a jewelry appraiser, and they're trying to recover or destroy any evidence of authentication, which suggests they're worried about prosecution, not just exposure. A smuggling operation can survive publicity. They simply shut down the current arrangements and establish new ones under different names. But a murder investigation with solid evidence leads to prison. Al-Rashid is trying to eliminate every piece of documentation that connects maritime imports to natural pearl smuggling before we can build a prosecutable case. So we need to move faster than he can destroy evidence. Precisely. Tomorrow you'll visit Bernard Holloway's auction house, determine what he knows about maritime imports and whether he sold smuggled pearls. Then locate Maritime Imports office on Water Street and observe their operations, who comes and goes, what deliveries they receive, whether Kellerman visits personally or conducts business by phone. I want a complete picture of the smuggling infrastructure before we approach the police. You think Kramer will take this seriously? He already closed Baxter's case. Once we provide evidence of the smuggling operation and connect it to Baxter's murder, Kramer will have no choice but to reopen the investigation. The Treasury Department will demand it. Customs fraud on this scale is a federal offense that makes local police look incompetent if they ignore it. The phone rang again. This time it was Inspector Kramer. Goodwin, what the hell are you and Wolfe doing with the Baxter case? Following evidence. Why? Because I just got a call from Arthur Kellerman at Port Authority Customs claiming you harassed him this afternoon, made unfounded accusations about smuggling, and threatened him with investigation unless he cooperated with your private inquiry. He's filing a complaint with the police commissioner. I covered the mouthpiece. Kellerman called Kramer, complaining I harassed him, filing a complaint with the commissioner. Wolfe's expression didn't change, but his fingers drummed once on his desk, a sign of annoyance. He gestured for me to continue. Inspector, I visited Kellerman's office and asked about Thomas Baxter's work. Kellerman claimed Baxter wasn't investigating anything and suggested his drowning was an accident caused by drinking. I asked if he knew Maritime Imports Limited. He said he didn't know them personally. I left. No threats, no harassment, just questions. Questions that apparently touched a nerve. Kellerman's lawyer is demanding you stay away from his client and claiming this is a shakedown attempt. What the hell is going on, Archie? Thomas Baxter was investigating pearl smuggling at Pier 42. He documented that Maritime Imports Limited was bringing in natural pearls disguised as cultured pearls to avoid import duties. Arthur Kellerman was facilitating the smuggling by expediting their shipments without proper inspection. Baxter was planning to report everything to the Treasury Department. 3 days before he could do that, he ended up dead in the East River with smuggled pearls in his pocket. Kellerman's complaint is an attempt to stop us from exposing his involvement. There was silence on the line. Then, you have proof of this smuggling operation? We have Baxter's documentation showing Maritime Imports shipments consistently underdeclared pearl values. We have testimony from a jewelry appraiser who authenticated Baxter's samples and confirmed they were natural pearls worth 10 to 20 times the declared values. We have testimony from Baxter's colleagues that Kellerman protects certain import companies and lives beyond his means. And we have the pearls that were planted on Baxter's body to make him look corrupt. That's circumstantial. Not enough for an arrest. It's enough for Treasury Department investigation. Once they audit Maritime Imports shipments and compare declared values to actual merchandise, they'll have proof of customs fraud. Once they investigate Kellerman's finances, they'll have proof of corruption. And once they establish the smuggling operation existed, we can prove Baxter was killed to protect it. Another pause. Put Wolfe on the phone. I handed over the receiver. Wolfe took it with visible distaste. He hated phone conversations almost as much as he hated leaving the brownstone. Yes, Inspector? I couldn't hear Kramer's side, but Wolfe's responses were characteristically precise. No, we're not conducting a shakedown. Yes, Mrs. Baxter hired me to investigate her husband's death, because the narrative doesn't fit the evidence. A customs inspector who didn't drink, was afraid of water, and was investigating smuggling doesn't accidentally get drunk and fall off a dock. The pearls prove intent. Someone wanted Baxter's body found with contraband to destroy his credibility. We'll have sufficient evidence within 3 days. If you'll wait that long before acting on Kellerman's complaint, I'll provide documentation that will satisfy both the police commissioner and the Treasury Department. Yes, 3 days. You have my word. After hanging up, Wolfe looked at me. Kramer has agreed to delay any action on Kellerman's complaint for 72 hours. In exchange, we must provide conclusive evidence that Baxter was murdered and that the smuggling operation exists. If we fail, Kellerman's lawyers will use the complaint to shut down our investigation and possibly file harassment charges. No pressure, then. Considerable pressure, which is why you'll spend tomorrow gathering the final pieces of evidence we need. Visit Holloway's auction house, observe Maritime Imports operations, and Archie, his expression was serious, be extremely careful. Al-Rashid has already demonstrated willingness to kill to protect his operation. He's broken into Driscoll's shop, and he's almost certainly monitoring our investigation. Don't give him an opportunity to eliminate you as he eliminated Baxter. I'll take Saul for backup. Good. 2 sets of eyes are better than 1, and Saul is reliable under pressure. Wolfe picked up the pearls again, studying them in the lamplight. These pearls came from oysters in the Persian Gulf, Archie. They were formed over years, layer by layer, around some irritating grain of sand. Then they were harvested, smuggled into New York, and used to frame a dead man. Now they're evidence in a murder investigation. They've had quite a journey. From oyster to evidence. Not the career path most pearls expect. No. But then, most pearls don't become entangled in murder. These particular pearls have seen the best and worst of human nature, the patience required to culture them, the greed that drove their smuggling, and the violence used to protect their illegal import. By the time we're finished, they'll have also witnessed justice. That evening, Fritz served an excellent dinner, oysters Rockefeller as an appetizer, thematically appropriate given the case, followed by roast duck with cherry sauce. Wolfe ate with his usual focused appreciation, but I noticed he kept glancing at Baxter's documentation spread across his desk. After dinner, he spent 2 hours cross-referencing shipping manifests with customs records, building a timeline of maritime imports pearl shipments over the past year. I helped by calling various shipping companies and gathering information about vessel arrivals from Persian Gulf ports. By 10 o'clock we had a clear picture. Maritime imports had brought in 23 pearl shipments in 12 months, all declared as cultured pearls with total declared value of approximately $200,000. If even half those shipments actually contained natural pearls as Baxter's documentation suggested, the real value was closer to $2 million, meaning they'd avoided approximately $600,000 in import duties. That's the financial motive, Wolfe said, studying the timeline. $600,000 in annual savings, split between maritime imports and Arthur Kellerman. Assume Kellerman receives 10% for facilitating the smuggling. That's $60,000 a year, tax-free. Enough to explain his expensive lifestyle and sufficient motivation to protect the arrangement through violence. What about Al-Rashid? What's his cut? If he's operational manager for maritime imports, he probably receives a percentage of the savings, plus whatever profit the company makes selling the smuggled pearls. Conservatively, perhaps $200,000 annually. That's more than enough to justify arranging Baxter's murder. I thought about Thomas Baxter, an honest customs inspector, earning maybe $5,000 a year, investigating criminals who were making 40 times that amount through smuggling. No wonder they'd killed him. He'd threatened to destroy an operation worth hundreds of thousands of dollars to people who viewed murder as a business expense. We're going to get them, I said. Al-Rashid, Kellerman, everyone involved. We're going to prove they killed Baxter, and we're going to make sure they serve time. Wolfe nodded slowly. Yes, but first we need the evidence that will satisfy prosecutors. Tomorrow's work is critical, Archie. Don't fail. I won't. I made my evening rounds of the brownstone. The dogs were at their positions, Caesar and Mars at the front, Apollo at the rear, Minerva on the stairs, Diana in the basement, Loyal under my desk, all alert, all professional, all ready to respond if threats materialized. Through the bulletproof windows, I could see West 35th Street settling into night. Somewhere out there, Karim al-Rashid was probably planning his next move, trying to determine how much we knew, how much evidence we had, and whether we needed to be eliminated as Baxter had been. He was about to discover that threatening Nero Wolfe's investigation was a mistake that led to only one destination, prison. The pearls sat on Wolfe's desk, catching light from the lamp. Beautiful, valuable, and stained with murder. Tomorrow, we'd begin collecting the evidence that would expose that murder and destroy the smuggling operation that had caused it. The case of the pearl smuggler was accelerating toward its conclusion, and someone was going to pay for Thomas Baxter's death. In full. Wednesday morning I was at Holloway & Associates on East 57th Street by 9 o'clock, with Sol Panzer positioned across the street watching the entrance, in case anything went sideways. The auction house occupied a converted townhouse between Madison and Park, 4 stories of elegant galleries where the wealthy came to acquire art, jewelry and antiques with the proper pedigree and provenance. The reception area was all dark wood paneling and hushed atmosphere. A woman in her 40s, dressed like she worked at a museum, greeted me with professional courtesy. "Do you have an appointment?" "No, but I'd like to speak with Bernard Holloway about estate pearl sales. I'm conducting authentication research for a private collector." That was the approach Wolfe and I had agreed on. Pose as a buyer's representative rather than an investigator. People talked more freely about business than about crimes. "Mr. Holloway is with a client at the moment. If you'd care to wait." I waited. The gallery walls displayed upcoming auction items, paintings, sculpture, jewelry. One case held a collection of Victorian brooches, another contained what looked like Renaissance rings. The place smelled of money and discretion. After perhaps 20 minutes, a door opened and Bernard Holloway emerged with an elderly woman who was clearly a client. He was perhaps 60, silver-haired, impeccably dressed in a 3-piece suit that probably cost more than I made in a month. He had the cultivated manner of someone who'd spent decades convincing wealthy people to trust him with their valuables. After the client departed, Holloway approached me with an appraising look. "You're interested in estate pearls? I'm Bernard Holloway. How can I help you?" "Archie Goodwin. I represent a private collector who's interested in acquiring high-quality natural pearls, Persian Gulf origin preferred. I understand you handle more estate pearl sales than anyone in New York." "That's accurate, though I should mention that natural pearls of exceptional quality are quite rare in the current market. Most high-end sales involve cultured pearls from Japan or antique pieces with documented provenance. Persian Gulf natural pearls specifically," he paused. "Those are extraordinarily difficult to source legitimately." "Why legitimately? Are there illegitimate sources?" Holloway gestured toward his office. "Perhaps we should discuss this privately." His office was smaller than I expected, but perfectly appointed. Antique desk, leather chairs, walls lined with auction catalogues and gemology references. He closed the door and sat behind his desk with the careful posture of someone preparing to navigate delicate territory. "Mr. Goodwin, I'll be direct with you. The natural pearl market exists in a grey area. Since the development of cultured pearl farming in Japan, natural pearls have become increasingly rare and valuable. Legitimate sources are limited, primarily estate sales from old families, liquidating jewelry collections. But there's also a robust black market supplied by smugglers who bring pearls into the country without proper customs declaration, avoiding import duties and documentation requirements. And some of those smuggled pearls end up at auction houses like yours." "Some do, yes. Not through my deliberate involvement, I should emphasize. But occasionally, dealers will consign pieces for auction that turn out to have questionable provenance. When we discover this, we withdraw the items. But we can't always verify the complete history of every piece we handle. What if I told you there's a company in New York, Maritime Imports Limited, that's been smuggling Persian Gulf natural pearls disguised as cultured pearls for over a year, and that some of those pearls have probably been sold through your auction house?" Holloway's expression didn't change, but his fingers tightened slightly on the arms of his chair. "That would be a serious allegation. Do you have evidence?" "A customs inspector named Thomas Baxter documented Maritime Imports' smuggling operation before he died last week. He was planning to report everything to the Treasury Department. Instead, he ended up drowned in the East River with smuggled pearls in his pocket. The police called it an accident. His widow thinks it was murder. And you're investigating on her behalf." "My employer is Nero Wolfe. He's investigating. I'm gathering information." I pulled out my notebook. "Mr. Holloway, I'm going to ask you a direct question, and your answer will determine whether you're treated as a cooperative witness or a potential accomplice. Have you knowingly sold smuggled pearls from Maritime Imports Limited?" He was silent for a long moment, clearly calculating. Then, "No, not knowingly, but I suspect I've sold pearls that originated from questionable sources without realizing it at the time." "Explain." "About 8 months ago, I was approached by a dealer I'd worked with occasionally, a man who specialized in estate jewelry from Middle Eastern families. He had access to exceptional natural pearls, always with plausible stories about their provenance, family collections being liquidated, estates being settled, that sort of thing. I consigned several pieces for auction, and they sold for substantial amounts." "Who was the dealer?" "His name was Karim al-Rashid. He represented Maritime Imports Limited." My pulse quickened. "Did al-Rashid consign pearls regularly?" "Every 2 or 3 months. Always natural pearls, always exceptional quality, always with reasonable explanations for their sudden availability. I didn't question it too closely. The profit margins were excellent, and the buyers were satisfied." "How much total did you sell for al-Rashid?" "Approximately $300,000 over 8 months. My commission was 10%, so I personally made $30,000 from those sales." "And you never wondered where al-Rashid was getting exceptional natural pearls every 2 months in quantities that most dealers never see in years?" Holloway's face hardened. "Mr. Goodwin, I run an auction house, not an investigation agency. I verify what I can verify, that pearls are authentic, that consignors have legal right to sell, that buyers receive what they're promised. If al-Rashid was smuggling those pearls, he hid it well enough that I had no way of knowing. Except now you know, which means you can either cooperate with our investigation or be named as a knowing participant in a smuggling operation that resulted in murder. That's blackmail. That's offering you a choice. Help us build a case against Al-Rashid and maritime imports, and you'll be treated as a witness who was deceived. Refuse, and the Treasury Department will assume you were complicit in customs fraud worth hundreds of thousands of dollars. Holloway stood and walked to his window, staring out at 57th Street. What do you want from me? Records. Every sale you handled for Al-Rashid. Dates, amounts, buyers, provenance, documentation he provided. Also, any communications between you, letters, contracts, payment records. Everything that establishes Al-Rashid was using your auction house to launder smuggled pearls. If I provide those records, Al-Rashid will know I cooperated. Al-Rashid is going to prison for murder and smuggling. What he knows won't matter. Holloway turned back from the window. All right, I'll provide the records, but I want assurances that my cooperation will be noted in any prosecution. I don't want to lose my business over something I didn't knowingly participate in. Work with us, and we'll make sure the prosecutors understand you were an unwitting participant who cooperated fully once you learned the truth. That's the best I can offer. He returned to his desk and began pulling files from a locked cabinet. These are the sales records for Al-Rashid's consignments. 16 separate auctions over 8 months. Total sales approximately $320,000. The buyers are listed, mostly private collectors, a few museums, several dealers who resell to international markets. I made copies of everything: dates, amounts, buyer information, Al-Rashid's contact details. It was exactly the documentation we needed to prove Maritime Imports was distributing smuggled pearls through legitimate auction channels. One more thing, I said. Has Al-Rashid contacted you since Thomas Baxter's death? No. Our last communication was 3 weeks ago, when he consigned a particularly exceptional strand of natural pearls for next month's auction. I haven't heard from him since. What strand? Holloway pulled another file. 52 matched natural pearls, each approximately 8 millimeters, Persian Gulf origin. Estimated auction value $40,000 to $50,000. Al-Rashid consigned them on October 20th, which was, he checked a calendar, 2 weeks before Baxter died. Do you still have the pearls? They're in our vault. Why? Because there's a chance they're directly connected to Baxter's murder. He confiscated samples from Maritime Imports shipments as evidence. The pearls found on his body were probably from the same batch Al-Rashid consigned to you. Holloway's face went pale. You're saying evidence of murder is sitting in my vault waiting to be auctioned. I'm saying those pearls need to be turned over to the police immediately as evidence in a smuggling and murder investigation. Can you do that voluntarily, or do we need a warrant? I'll do it voluntarily. The last thing I need is to be caught auctioning evidence in a homicide. He made a note. I'll contact the police today and arrange transfer of the pearls and all related documentation. I thanked him and left, collecting Saul from across the street. We walked 2 blocks before I was confident no one was following. Results? Saul asked. Complete sales records proving Al-Rashid used Holloway's auction house to sell smuggled pearls, plus a strand of 52 pearls consigned by Al-Rashid 2 weeks before Baxter died, probably part of the same shipment Baxter was investigating. Holloway's turning everything over to police as evidence. That's solid. What's next? Maritime Imports office on Water Street. I want to observe their operations, see who comes and goes, determine if Kellerman visits personally or keeps his distance. We caught a taxi downtown to the financial district. Water Street ran along the East River near the old wharves, and number 142 was a 4-story building that had probably been a shipping warehouse in the previous century before being converted to offices. Maritime Imports Limited occupied the 2nd floor, according to the building directory. We positioned ourselves in a coffee shop across the street with good sightlines to the entrance. Saul ordered coffee and a newspaper to make us look like we belonged. I watched the building. Over the next 2 hours, we observed 10:15 a.m. Kareem Al-Rashid arrived in a black Lincoln sedan driven by someone else. He was exactly as Driscoll had described, 40s, well-dressed, dark hair, Middle Eastern features. He carried a briefcase and moved with the confidence of someone who owned the territory. 10:47 a.m., a delivery truck pulled up, and 2 men unloaded several wooden crates similar to the one that had contained the pearls delivered to Wolfe. The crates were carried into the building through a side entrance. No customs inspection, no documentation visible. 11:23 a.m., Arthur Kellerman arrived in his Cadillac, parked illegally in front of the building, and went inside. He stayed approximately 30 minutes, then emerged looking satisfied. Al-Rashid walked him to his car, and they spoke briefly before Kellerman drove away. That was the connection we needed. Kellerman personally visiting maritime imports during business hours, establishing direct contact between the corrupt customs official and the smuggling operation. 12:15 p.m. Al-Rashid emerged with another man, older, perhaps 60, expensive suit, carrying himself with the authority of someone senior in the organization. They walked to a restaurant 2 blocks away. Saul followed at a distance while I maintained surveillance on the building. By 1 o'clock, Saul had returned with photographs of Al-Rashid and his lunch companion entering the restaurant. The older guy, I heard the maitre d' call him Mr. Nazarian. They were speaking a language I didn't recognize, but it sounded Middle Eastern. Nazarian could be Armenian or Iranian. Probably the owner of maritime imports, with Al-Rashid as operational manager. We maintained surveillance until 3 o'clock, documenting everyone who entered or left the building. Then I called the brownstone from a payphone. Wolfe. Complete documentation from Holloway's auction house, showing Al-Rashid sold 300,000 in smuggled pearls through auction over 8 months. Holloway's turning over a strand of 52 pearls, consigned by Al-Rashid 2 weeks before Baxter died, probably from the same shipment Baxter was investigating. Also observed Kellerman visiting maritime imports personally this morning, confirming direct contact between corrupt official and smuggling operation. Plus I've got a name, possibly the owner, someone called Nazarian, who had lunch with Al-Rashid. Excellent work. Return to the brownstone. I'm expecting Inspector Kramer at 4 o'clock. We'll present everything we've gathered and force him to reopen the Baxter investigation as homicide. When I arrived back at the brownstone, Wolfe was in the office arranging documents across his desk in precise order. Baxter's shipping manifests, Driscoll's authentication records, Holloway's sales documentation, and the photographs Saul had taken of Kellerman visiting maritime imports. The pearls sat in the center of it all, catching light, silent witnesses to murder. At precisely 4 o'clock, Inspector Kramer arrived. Caesar and Mars let him pass without incident. They knew him well enough by now that his presence didn't trigger alarm, though both dogs remained watchful. Kramer bit down on his cigar as he settled into the red leather chair, his expression suggesting he was prepared to be annoyed. All right, Wolfe, you've got until 5 o'clock to convince me that Thomas Baxter was murdered and that I should reopen a case I've already closed. If you can't do that, Kellerman's harassment complaint goes through, and you're done investigating this case. Impress me. Wolfe gestured to the documents. Inspector, I'm going to tell you a story about pearls, smuggling, and murder. When I'm finished, you'll agree that reopening the Baxter investigation isn't optional, it's mandatory. And he began to speak. Wolfe picked up the strand of pearls, holding them so they caught the afternoon light filtering through the bulletproof windows. Inspector, these pearls were found in Thomas Baxter's pocket when his body was recovered from the East River. The police report states they're natural pearls worth approximately $14,000. That's accurate. What the report doesn't state is why a customs inspector earning $5,000 annually would possess such valuable contraband, or how that contraband connects to his death. Kramer shifted in his chair. The assumption was that Baxter confiscated them from a smuggler and kept them instead of reporting them, or that he was smuggling them himself. Both assumptions are convenient and wrong. Thomas Baxter was an honest customs inspector who discovered a sophisticated pearl smuggling operation. He documented that operation meticulously for 2 months. 3 days before he planned to report his findings to the Treasury Department, he was murdered. The pearls were planted on his body to destroy his credibility and ensure the police wouldn't investigate further. It worked. You closed the case as accidental drowning within hours of finding the body. That's a theory. Where's the proof? Wolfe gestured to the documents spread across his desk. The proof is here. Let me walk you through it systematically. He picked up one of Baxter's shipping manifests. Thomas Baxter documented 23 pearl shipments imported by Maritime Imports Limited over 12 months. Each shipment was declared as cultured pearls from Japan, with declared values between $5,000 and $10,000. Total declared value approximately $200,000. He set down that manifest and picked up Driscoll's authentication report. Baxter brought sample pearls from 6 of those shipments to Leonard Driscoll, a reputable jewelry appraiser on Maiden Lane. Driscoll authenticated them using X-ray examination and confirmed they were natural pearls from the Persian Gulf, not cultured pearls from Japan. Driscoll estimated the actual value of those samples at 10 to 20 times the declared amounts. So Maritime Imports was smuggling natural pearls disguised as cultured pearls to avoid import duties. Exactly. If we assume that even half of the 23 shipments contained natural pearls instead of cultured ones, the actual imported value was approximately $2 million rather than $200,000. That represents customs fraud of roughly $600,000, the difference between what should have been paid in import duties and what was actually paid. Wolfe picked up another document. Baxter's investigation revealed that Maritime Imports shipments received expedited customs processing despite irregularities in their manifests. The person facilitating that expedited processing was Arthur Kellerman, Baxter's supervisor at Pier 4. Kellerman lives in Westchester in a home worth more than 5 times his annual salary, drives a new Cadillac, and takes expensive vacations. His lifestyle is inconsistent with a customs supervisor's legitimate income. You're saying Kellerman was taking bribes to facilitate the smuggling? I'm saying Kellerman was an active participant in the smuggling operation, receiving a percentage of the avoided import duties in exchange for ensuring Maritime Imports shipments passed through customs without proper inspection. Archie observed Kellerman visiting Maritime Imports office this morning, a personal visit during business hours that establishes direct contact between the corrupt official and the smuggling operation. Kramer pulled out his notebook. I'll need surveillance photos, dates, times. I provided copies of Saul's photographs showing Kellerman entering and leaving the Maritime Imports building, along with timestamps and my written observations. Wolfe continued. The smuggled pearls were being distributed through Bernard Holloway's auction house on East 57th Street. Karim al-Rashid, who represents Maritime Imports as Director of Acquisitions, consigned natural pearls to Holloway 16 times over 8 months. Total sales, approximately $300,000. Holloway provided complete records. He gestured to another stack of documents, showing dates, amounts, buyers, and provenance claims that al-Rashid fabricated to conceal the pearls' smuggled origin. Holloway knew the pearls were smuggled. He claims he didn't, and I'm inclined to believe him. Al-Rashid provided plausible stories about estate liquidations and family collections. Holloway verified the pearls were authentic, but didn't investigate their ultimate origin. He was a useful dupe, not a conspirator. And where does Baxter's murder fit into this? Wolfe set down the pearls and leaned back in his chair. Thomas Baxter had documented the smuggling operation thoroughly. He had shipping manifests, authentication reports from Driscoll, photographs of cargo, and financial analysis proving the declared values were fraudulent. He told his wife he was taking everything to the Treasury Department by the end of the week. If that report had been filed, Maritime Imports smuggling operation would have been exposed, Kellerman would have been arrested, and al-Rashid would have faced federal prosecution for customs fraud. So they killed him to prevent the report. They killed him, faked the drowning to appear accidental, forced alcohol down his throat post-mortem to create the appearance of intoxication, and planted pearls in his pocket to make him appear corrupt. The medical examiner assumed Baxter was drunk when he drowned because that fit the physical evidence. What the ME didn't test for was post-mortem alcohol administration, pouring whiskey down a corpse's throat before rigor mortis sets in. Kramer leaned forward. You're saying they murdered him, then staged an elaborate scene to fool the ME and the police? Exactly, and it worked. You closed the case as accidental drowning. Baxter's credibility was destroyed by the planted pearls, and the smuggling operation continued without interruption. Wolfe picked up another document. Until Lena Driscoll's shop was broken into 2 nights ago. Someone searched his premises thoroughly, but didn't take valuable merchandise. They were looking for Baxter's documentation and the photographs Driscoll had taken of authenticated pearl samples. That burglary demonstrates consciousness of guilt and fear of prosecution. Did Driscoll report it? He did, though he omitted mention of Baxter to avoid exposing himself to additional danger. The police report should be in your system. Kramer made more notes. This is substantial, Wolfe, but it's still circumstantial. I can prove smuggling. I can probably prove Kellerman's corruption, but proving murder requires more than demonstrating motive and opportunity. I need evidence that someone from Maritime Imports killed Baxter. I'm aware, which is why you're going to obtain a warrant to search Maritime Imports offices and financial records. You'll find evidence of payments to Kellerman, probably disguised as consulting fees or bonuses. You'll find shipping records that contradict the customs declarations. And you may find communications between Al-Rashid and Kellerman discussing the Baxter problem and its resolution. That's a fishing expedition. I need probable cause for a warrant. You have probable cause, customs fraud, on a massive scale, corruption of a federal official, and suspicious death of the investigator who was documenting those crimes. Any judge will sign that warrant, Inspector. Kramer was silent for a long moment, reviewing the documents, checking the photographs, calculating the legal and political implications. Finally, he looked up. All right, I'll take this to the DA and request warrants for maritime imports and Kellerman's financial records. But Wolfe, if this falls apart, if the evidence doesn't support murder charges, Kellerman's harassment complaint goes through and you'll face consequences for interfering with a closed case. The evidence will support murder charges. You'll discover I'm right, Inspector. I always am in these matters. Your humility is overwhelming. Kramer stood, gathering the documents. I'll be in touch. And Goodwin, he looked at me. Stay away from Kellerman and Al-Rashid until we execute the warrants. I don't want them claiming police harassment or investigator intimidation. Understood. After Kramer left, acknowledged by Caesar and Mars with the barest glance as he passed, I looked at Wolfe. You think Kramer will actually get the warrants? He will. The evidence is too compelling to ignore, and the political pressure from Treasury Department will force action. Once Kramer searches maritime imports offices and Kellerman's finances, he'll find proof of the smuggling operation and the payments that facilitated it. At that point, Al-Rashid and Kellerman will both face federal charges for customs fraud. What about the murder charges? Those depend on what Kramer finds in their records. If Al-Rashid was foolish enough to document communications about eliminating Baxter, or if Kellerman kept records of payments related to that elimination, the murder charges will follow. If not, we may need to apply additional pressure to force one of them to testify against the other. The phone rang. I answered. Goodwin residence. Mr. Goodwin, this is Helen Baxter. I just received a phone call that frightened me. A man with an accent, Middle Eastern I think, called and said I should stop causing problems about my husband's death. He said accidents happen to people who don't know when to leave things alone. Then he hung up. I covered the mouthpiece and relayed this to Wolfe. His face darkened. They're threatening Mrs. Baxter directly. That's escalation and desperation. He gestured. Tell her to leave her apartment immediately and check into a hotel under a false name. We'll arrange protection. I relayed this to Mrs. Baxter. She agreed, though her voice was shaking. After getting her hotel information, I hung up and called Saul Panzer. Saul, we need protection detail. Mrs. Baxter just received death threats from someone connected to maritime imports. She's checking into the Vanderbilt Hotel under the name Helen Morrison. Can you station yourself there and make sure no one approaches her? On my way. What's the threat level? High. These people have already killed her husband. They're capable of killing her too if they think it will stop the investigation. After arranging Saul's protection detail, I looked at Wolfe. They're panicking. Threatening Baxter's widow means they know we're close to exposing them. It means they're considering eliminating everyone connected to the investigation. Mrs. Baxter, Leonard Driscoll, possibly Bernard Holloway, and certainly us. The brownstone security is adequate. But outside these walls we're all vulnerable. Wolfe pressed his button. Fritz, please ensure all doors are locked and bolted. Inform the dogs that we're on elevated security status. No one enters without explicit authorization from Archie or myself. Fritz appeared in the doorway. Already done, sir. After Inspector Kramer left, I secured all entrances. Caesar and Mars are at the front, Apollo at the rear. Minerva is monitoring the second floor, Diana the basement. Loyal is here with Archie. The brownstone is a fortress. Good. Maintain that status until further notice. That evening passed with heightened tension. Every car that drove past the brownstone received scrutiny. Every pedestrian was evaluated as potential threat. The dogs sensed the elevated alert status and maintained their positions with professional intensity. Fritz served a simple dinner, beef stew, bread, a good red wine, but even excellent food couldn't fully distract from the knowledge that we were now in direct conflict with criminals who'd already demonstrated willingness to kill. At 8 o'clock, Saul called to report that Mrs. Baxter was safely checked into the Vanderbilt Hotel and that he'd positioned himself in the lobby where he could monitor anyone approaching her room. At 9 o'clock, Leonard Driscoll called to say he'd closed his shop and was staying with his sister in Connecticut until the case was resolved. At 10 o'clock, the phone rang again. I answered. Goodwin residence. Mr. Goodwin, this is Bernard Holloway. I wanted to inform you that I received a visit this evening from Karim al-Rashid. He was unpleasant. What happened? He came to my home, my private residence, not the auction house. He said he'd learned I'd been speaking with investigators about maritime imports, and that I'd agreed to provide records of our business transactions. He strongly suggested that would be a mistake. When I told him I'd already provided those records to the police, he became threatening. He said people who betray business relationships sometimes find their reputations destroyed or their businesses targeted by unfortunate events. Then he left. Did he threaten physical violence? Not explicitly, but the implication was clear. Cooperate with the investigation and face consequences. Mr. Holloway, you need to report this to the police immediately. Inspector Kramer at Homicide is handling the case. Tell him exactly what al-Rashid said and did. That's witness intimidation, and it strengthens the case against maritime imports. I'll call him now. But Mr. Goodwin, I'm frightened. I've spent 30 years building my auction house's reputation. If al-Rashid follows through on his threats to destroy my business or my reputation, he won't have the opportunity. By this time tomorrow, al-Rashid will be under arrest for customs fraud, witness intimidation, and possibly murder. Just report the threats to Kramer and stay safe. Don't go anywhere alone. Don't meet with anyone from maritime imports, and don't discuss the case with anyone except police or prosecutors. After hanging up, I updated Wolfe. He nodded grimly. Al-Rashid is making a tactical error. By threatening witnesses directly, he's providing evidence of consciousness of guilt and obstruction of justice. Kramer will add those charges to the warrant application, which will make it easier to obtain judicial approval. Unless al-Rashid decides that eliminating witnesses is more efficient than threatening them. That's a risk, which is why everyone connected to this investigation needs protection until arrests are made. Wolfe stood, signaling the evening was ending. Tomorrow Kramer will execute the search warrants. When he does, the case will move rapidly toward prosecution. Be prepared for al-Rashid's final desperate actions. Cornered criminals are the most dangerous. I made my final rounds of the brownstone. The dogs were at maximum alert. Caesar and Mars positioned where they could see both the front entrance and the office. Apollo pacing the rear hallway with restless energy. Minerva on the stairs with a clear view of all second-floor approaches. Diana in the basement monitoring sounds from below. Loyal remained under my desk, his brick-red coat almost glowing in the lamplight, his intelligent eyes watching everything. That dog had walked 200 miles through wilderness to save his master's legacy. He understood loyalty, duty, and the importance of standing guard when threats materialized. Through the bulletproof windows, West 35th Street was quiet. But somewhere in the city, Karim al-Rashid was probably planning his next move, trying to determine whether he could still save his smuggling operation or whether he needed to eliminate everyone who threatened it. He was about to discover that threatening Nero Wolfe's investigation and witnesses was a mistake that led to only one destination: prison. The pearls sat on Wolfe's desk, no longer just evidence but symbols of everything this case represented. Beauty created through years of natural process, corrupted by greed, stained with murder, and now serving as instruments of justice. Tomorrow, those pearls would help convict the people who'd killed Thomas Baxter. Tomorrow, the smuggling operation would be exposed and destroyed. Tomorrow, justice would be served. But tonight, we stood watch in a fortress, surrounded by professional guardians, waiting for dawn and the final confrontation that would end this case. The case of the pearl smuggler was approaching its climax, and someone was going to pay for what they'd done. In full. Thursday morning, Inspector Kramer called at 8 o'clock, waking me from a sleep that had been lighter than usual given the threats against witnesses and the knowledge that we were in direct conflict with killers. Goodwin, tell Wolfe I've got the warrants. Federal judge signed them an hour ago based on the customs fraud evidence and the witness intimidation reports. I'm executing searches of maritime imports offices and Arthur Kellerman's home simultaneously at 9 o'clock. Treasury Department agents are participating. This is now a joint federal and local investigation. Wolfe will want to know what you find. He'll know when I know. I'll call after the searches are complete. At 9:15, Wolfe descended from the plant rooms to find me already at my desk with coffee and the morning papers. The Times had a small article on page 12 about increased customs enforcement at Port of New York facilities, but nothing about our investigation yet. That would change once arrests were made. Kramer executed the search warrants. I reported. Maritime imports and Kellerman's home. Simultaneous searches with Treasury Department participation. He'll call when he has results. Good. The searches will produce evidence of the smuggling operation and Kellerman's corruption. Whether they produce evidence of murder depends on how careless Al-Rashid and Kellerman were about documenting their communications. The morning passed with tense waiting. Wolfe read the papers, examined his orchid records, and drank beer. I worked through correspondence and tried not to watch the clock. At 11:30, the phone rang. Goodwin residence. Archie, it's Kramer. We hit the jackpot. Maritime Imports Office had filing cabinets full of shipping manifests that contradict their customs declarations, documentation, showing the pearls were actually natural pearls from Bahrain and Dubai, not cultured pearls from Japan. We found financial records showing payments to Kellerman, disguised as consulting fees, $60,000 over 12 months. We found communications between Al-Rashid and a man named Nazarian, who appears to own Maritime Imports. And we found, he paused for emphasis, a letter from Kellerman to Al-Rashid dated October 22nd, stating that the Baxter situation has been resolved permanently, and thanking Al-Rashid for handling the matter with appropriate discretion. I covered the mouthpiece. They found everything. Shipping manifests, proving the smuggling, financial records showing payments to Kellerman, and a letter from Kellerman thanking Al-Rashid for resolving the Baxter situation permanently. Wolfe's expression didn't change, but I saw satisfaction in his eyes. That letter is an admission of conspiracy to commit murder. Kellerman knew Baxter was killed, and thanked Al-Rashid for arranging it. Kramer continued. Kellerman's home search produced similar results, offshore bank account statements showing the $60,000 in deposits, correspondence with Al-Rashid discussing shipment schedules and customs procedures, and a handwritten note that says TB becoming serious problem needs permanent solution. TB is almost certainly Thomas Baxter. Are you making arrests? Within the hour, Kellerman's in custody already. We arrested him at home during the search. He's lawyered up and refusing to talk. Al-Rashid wasn't at Maritime Imports when we executed the warrant, but we've got units looking for him. Once we locate him, he'll be arrested for customs fraud, conspiracy to commit murder, and witness intimidation. We're also looking for this Nazarian character. He's probably the one who ordered everything, with Al-Rashid as operational manager. What about the murder charges specifically? Will the DA prosecute Baxter's death as homicide? Yes. The letter from Kellerman and the note about permanent solution are sufficient to charge conspiracy to commit murder. We'll need more evidence to prove who actually killed Baxter and how, but we can hold Al-Rashid and Kellerman on conspiracy charges while we build the complete case. Mrs. Baxter will want to know. I'll call her myself. And Goodwin, tell Wolfe I owe him one. Without his investigation, we'd have closed this as accidental drowning and never looked at the smuggling operation. He was right. Again, it's annoying. After hanging up, I relayed the complete conversation to Wolfe. He nodded slowly. Justice moves incrementally, Archie. We've exposed the smuggling operation, proven Kellerman's corruption, and established that Baxter was murdered to protect that operation. The conspiracy charges will hold while prosecutors develop evidence about the actual murder mechanics. Within days, either Kellerman or Al-Rashid will decide that testifying against the other offers better chances of reduced sentencing. When that happens, we'll have complete testimony about who killed Baxter and how. You think one of them will turn on the other? Inevitably, criminals rarely maintain solidarity under pressure. Kellerman will claim he only facilitated smuggling, and that Al-Rashid acted independently in killing Baxter. Al-Rashid will claim he was following Kellerman's orders. Both will try to minimize their own culpability by maximizing the others. The prosecutors will exploit that conflict to extract full confessions. The phone rang again. This time it was Saul Panzer. Archie, you need to know. Al-Rashid was spotted near the Vanderbilt Hotel about 20 minutes ago. Hotel security noticed him in the lobby, acting suspiciously, checking the guest registry. When they approached him, he left quickly. Mrs. Baxter is safe. I've moved her to a different room on a different floor and arranged for hotel security to screen all visitors. But Al-Rashid knows she's here, and he was probably planning to either threaten her or eliminate her as a witness. The police are looking for him. He's wanted for arrest on multiple federal charges. If you see him again, call Kramer immediately, and don't try to apprehend him yourself. He's dangerous and probably armed. Understood. I'll maintain protection until she's released from witness duty. After I relayed this to Wolfe, his expression darkened. Al-Rashid is desperate. He knows arrests are imminent, and he's trying to eliminate witnesses before being taken into custody. That makes him extremely dangerous. He has nothing to lose and everything to gain by silencing everyone who can testify against him. Should we increase security here? The brownstone security is adequate. 6 trained dogs, bulletproof windows, reinforced doors, and our own vigilance. Al-Rashid would be foolish to attack this address directly. But remain alert, Archie. Desperate criminals make unpredictable choices. At 1 o'clock, Fritz served lunch. Cold roast chicken with herb mayonnaise, crusty bread, and a crisp white wine. Wolfe ate with his usual attention to food, but I noticed he kept glancing toward the windows, toward the front entrance, calculating risks. At 2:30, the phone rang again. Goodwin residence. Mr. Goodwin, this is Leonard Driscoll. I'm calling from Connecticut. I thought you should know my shop in Manhattan was broken into again last night. This time they didn't just search, they vandalized everything. Cases smashed, inventory scattered, my workshop destroyed. They spray-painted messages on the walls. Keep your mouth shut, and snitches pay. The police are treating it as retaliation for my cooperation with the investigation. Al-Rashid? Almost certainly. He's sending a message to anyone who helped your investigation. Mr. Goodwin, I'm not returning to Manhattan until he's in custody. My business may be destroyed, but my life isn't worth risking. Stay in Connecticut, or Rashid will be arrested soon. The police executed search warrants this morning and found extensive evidence of smuggling and conspiracy to murder. He's wanted for multiple federal charges. Once he's in custody, you can return safely. After hanging up, I updated Wolfe. Al-Rashid vandalized Driscoll's shop last night, destroyed inventory, spray-painted threats. He's systematically attacking everyone who cooperated with us, which demonstrates consciousness of guilt and obstruction of justice, but also demonstrates dangerous instability. A rational criminal would flee the jurisdiction to avoid arrest. Al-Rashid is staying in New York to threaten witnesses, which suggests either overwhelming arrogance or complete loss of rational judgment. At 3 o'clock, Kramer called again. We found Al-Rashid, or rather, he found us. He walked into the Midtown South Precinct an hour ago with a lawyer and surrendered voluntarily on condition that his lawyer be present during all questioning. He's being transported to the federal courthouse now for arraignment on customs fraud, conspiracy to commit murder, and witness intimidation charges. Did he say anything? Only through his lawyer complete denial of all charges, claims the shipping manifests were falsified by subordinates without his knowledge, claims the payments to Kellerman were legitimate consulting fees, claims the letter from Kellerman was misinterpreted, and claims he had no knowledge of any plot to kill Thomas Baxter. It's all lies, but it's what he's saying officially. What about Nazarian, the man who apparently owns maritime imports? Gone. Left the country 3 days ago according to passport records, flew to Beirut via Paris. We've got an international warrant, but he's probably beyond our reach, unless he's foolish enough to return to the United States. Al-Rashid will take the fall for the operation, while Nazarian escapes prosecution. That's unsatisfying. That's international smuggling. The top guys usually get away while the operational managers go to prison. But we got Al-Rashid and Kellerman, and that's something. The DA is confident we can convict both of them for conspiracy to murder, even if we can't prove who actually killed Baxter. After Kramer hung up, I sat in silence for a moment. Al-Rashid in custody, Kellerman arrested. The smuggling operation exposed. We'd accomplished what we'd set out to do. But Nazarian's escape left the case feeling incomplete. Wolfe apparently felt the same way. Nazarian's flight confirms he was the principal in the operation. He ordered the smuggling, profited most substantially, and probably ordered Baxter's murder directly. Al-Rashid carried out those orders. Kellerman facilitated them, but Nazarian was the architect. And he gets away. For now. But Archie, criminals who flee to foreign jurisdictions rarely stay free indefinitely. Nazarian will make a mistake, or political circumstances will change, or he'll attempt to conduct business that brings him within reach of American law enforcement. When that happens, the warrant will be waiting. Justice delayed is not justice denied, merely postponed. That evening, the news broke publicly. The Times ran a front-page story. Federal agents arrest customs official, businessman in pearl smuggling case, murder charges possible. The article detailed the searches of maritime imports and Kellerman's home, the evidence of systematic customs fraud, and the conspiracy to murder Thomas Baxter to prevent his investigation from reaching the Treasury Department. Helen Baxter called at 6 o'clock, her voice thick with emotion. "Mr. Wolfe, I can't thank you enough. Inspector Kramer told me everything. The smuggling operation, Kellerman's corruption, the evidence proving Thomas was murdered. You gave me back my husband's reputation. You proved he wasn't corrupt or drunk or careless. He was a hero who died trying to do the right thing. Thank you." Wolfe's expression softened slightly. "Mrs. Baxter, your husband was indeed a hero. He documented a complex criminal enterprise despite knowing it put him in danger. He maintained meticulous records that made our investigation possible. Without his courage and diligence, none of this would have been exposed. You should be proud of him." "I am, and I'm grateful to you for making sure everyone knows the truth." After she hung up, Wolfe sat in silence for a long moment, staring at the pearls on his desk. "Archie," he said finally, "arrange for these pearls to be returned to Mrs. Baxter. They're evidence in the murder case, but once the trial concludes, they're legally hers. She should sell them and use the proceeds however she wishes, perhaps to establish a scholarship in her husband's name, or simply to provide financial security for herself. They came from crime, but they can fund something good. That's surprisingly sentimental of you. That's recognition of moral accounting. These pearls represent everything ugly about this case: smuggling, corruption, murder. Returning them to the victim's widow and allowing her to transform them into something positive is the closest thing to redemption they'll ever have." Fritz appeared in the doorway. "Dinner will be ready in 30 minutes. I've prepared striped base with lemon and herbs, accompanied by roasted vegetables and a white Bordeaux. I thought a celebration was appropriate, given the successful resolution of the case." "Excellent choice, Fritz, though I'd call it satisfaction rather than celebration. The case is resolved, the criminals are in custody, and justice is proceeding. That's adequate." After dinner, I made my evening rounds. The dogs were beginning to relax from their elevated alert status. Caesar and Mars still at the front, but slightly less tense. Apollo's pacing less frantic. Minerva settled on the stairs in her usual observant position. Diana quiet in the basement. Loyal remained under my desk, but his posture had shifted from high alert to normal watchfulness. He knew, the way dogs somehow know, that the immediate danger had passed. Through the bulletproof windows, West 35th Street was settling into its Thursday evening rhythm. Somewhere in federal custody, Al-Rashid and Kellerman were beginning to understand that their smuggling operation was finished and their freedom was measured in hours before formal charging and arraignment. Somewhere in Beirut, Nazarian was probably celebrating his escape, not realizing that international warrants had long memories and that his freedom was temporary. And somewhere in New York, Helen Baxter was finally able to grieve her husband properly, knowing that his death had been avenged and his reputation restored. The case of the pearl smuggler was effectively closed. Trials would follow, months of legal proceedings, testimony, expert witnesses, and eventual convictions. But the investigation was complete. The truth had been revealed. Justice was in motion. The pearls sat on Wolfe's desk, catching lamplight for the last time before being transferred to evidence custody. Beautiful, valuable, and finally, after their long journey from oyster to smuggler, to murder weapon to evidence, serving their final purpose, instruments of justice. Tomorrow would bring loose ends and final documentation, but tonight, the brownstone was at peace, the fortress secure, the guardians vigilant, the case resolved. Friday morning brought an unexpected development that transformed the case from resolved to prosecutable with ironclad certainty. I was at my desk at 9 o'clock, working through the final case documentation for our files, when Inspector Kramer called. "Goodwin, tell Wolfe we've got a break. Arthur Kellerman's lawyer contacted the DA an hour ago. Kellerman wants to make a deal, full testimony against Al-Rashid and Nazarian, in exchange for reduced charges and sentencing consideration. He's flipping on his co-conspirators. Completely. His lawyer says Kellerman will testify that Al-Rashid personally arranged Baxter's murder, that Nazarian ordered it, and that Kellerman was pressured into writing the situation resolved letter under threat of being eliminated himself. He'll also testify about the complete smuggling operation, how it worked, who was involved, how much money changed hands, everything. In exchange for what? Pleading guilty to conspiracy and corruption charges with recommendation for minimum sentencing, probably 5 to 7 years instead of 20 to life. The DA is considering it because Kellerman's testimony will guarantee convictions against al-Rashid for murder and Nazarian if we ever get him in custody. I covered the mouthpiece and relayed this to Wolfe, who just descended from the plant rooms. His expression suggested this was expected rather than surprising. Kellerman was always the weak link, Wolfe said. He's a bureaucrat who profited from corruption, but probably never intended to become involved in murder. When al-Rashid killed Baxter, Kellerman found himself complicit in homicide rather than just customs fraud. That's a significant psychological difference. Most corrupt officials can rationalize bribery, but few can rationalize murder. Kellerman's conscience, or at least his survival instinct, has overcome his loyalty to co-conspirators. I uncovered the mouthpiece. Wolfe says this is expected. Kellerman's a bureaucrat who got in over his head. What does he know about the actual murder? According to his lawyer's proffer, Kellerman knows who killed Baxter, how they did it, and where the body was dumped. Al-Rashid used 2 men enforcers who work for maritime imports as dock workers and security personnel. They grabbed Baxter on the pier when he came to check something. Thursday night, strangled him, poured whiskey down his throat to fake intoxication, planted the pearls in his pocket, and threw him in the East River near Pier 42. Kellerman wasn't present, but al-Rashid told him what happened the next day and demanded he write the situation resolved letter to create documentary evidence of Kellerman's complicity. Al-Rashid was protecting himself, making sure Kellerman couldn't testify without implicating himself. Exactly. But now Kellerman's decided that 5 years in minimum security prison beats 20 to life in maximum security, so he's giving up everyone. Will his testimony hold up in court? The DA thinks so. Kellerman can testify about the smuggling operation from direct personal involvement, and he can testify about al-Rashid's statements regarding Baxter's murder. That's admissible as admission against interest. Al-Rashid told Kellerman what happened, which makes it hearsay exception. Combined with the physical evidence, the shipping manifests and the financial records, it's enough for conviction. When does Kellerman give his formal statement? This afternoon. The DA wants Wolfe there as the investigator who developed the case. Can he come to the federal courthouse at 2 o'clock? I looked at Wolfe, who was already shaking his head. Mr. Wolfe doesn't leave the brownstone for any reason short of fire or imminent death. If the DA wants him to hear Kellerman's statement, they'll have to conduct it here. Kramer made an exasperated sound. The DA's not going to bring a murder suspect to a private residence for questioning. Then the DA will get a transcript of Kellerman's statement, and Wolfe will review it afterward. But he's not going to the federal courthouse. After some negotiation, Kramer agreed that Kellerman's statement would be taken at the DA's office with me present as Wolfe's representative, and that a complete transcript would be provided to Wolfe immediately afterward. At 1:30, I headed downtown to the federal courthouse, where the district attorney's office occupied several floors. The conference room where Kellerman's statement would be taken was set up for serious business. Court reporter, recording equipment, assistant district attorneys, and Inspector Kramer, representing the NYPD. Arthur Kellerman looked like he'd aged 10 years in 3 days. His expensive suit was rumpled, his face was grey, and his hands shook slightly as he sat down across from the prosecutors. His lawyer, a sharp-faced man named Bernard Rothstein, sat beside him, ready to object if questioning strayed from the agreed-upon scope. The lead prosecutor, an assistant DA named Margaret Sullivan, began the questioning. Mr. Kellerman, you've agreed to provide full and truthful testimony regarding the smuggling operation conducted by Maritime Imports Limited and the murder of Thomas Baxter in exchange for reduced charges and sentencing consideration. Is that correct? Yes. Kellerman's voice was hoarse. Let's start with the smuggling operation. How did you become involved with Maritime Imports? Kellerman took a breath. About 18 months ago, I was approached by Karim al-Rashid at a restaurant near the port. He said he represented an import company that needed reliable customs processing for pearl shipments from the Middle East. He said they'd make it worth my while if I could expedite their shipments and avoid excessive scrutiny. What did make it worth my while mean? He offered me $5,000 per shipment to ensure their cargo passed through customs quickly without detailed inspection. He said the pearls were legitimate, but that bureaucratic delays were costing his company money. It seemed like a victimless arrangement. I'd process paperwork faster, they'd avoid delays, and I'd supplement my income. How many shipments did you facilitate? 23 over 12 months. $5,000 per shipment. $115,000 total. Paid in cash. Delivered to various locations around the city. Did you know the shipments contained smuggled natural pearls disguised as cultured pearls? Kellerman hesitated. Not initially. For the first few months, I assumed they were legitimate cultured pearls, and Al-Rashid just wanted to avoid bureaucratic delays. But around the 6-month mark, I started noticing that the declared values seemed low compared to the cargo quantities. I mentioned this to Al-Rashid, and he made it clear that asking questions was unhealthy. He threatened you? He said people who worked with maritime imports were either loyal or they became problems. He said problems had short careers. I understood the implication. But you continued facilitating the smuggling despite knowing it was illegal? Yes. By then I'd already accepted over $50,000. I was complicit. Stopping would have meant admitting my corruption and facing prosecution. I convinced myself it was just customs evasion, not hurting anyone directly. Sullivan made notes. When did Thomas Baxter's investigation begin? About 2 months before he died. Baxter was a senior inspector in my office, very thorough, very honest. He started noticing that maritime imports shipments had irregularities, wrong country of origin for the declared merchandise, values that didn't match market rates, shipping routes that didn't make sense. He came to me with his concerns. What did you tell him? I told him to focus on his assigned duties and stop inventing problems. I said the shipments had been reviewed and approved by senior personnel, meaning me, and that he should trust the process. I was trying to shut down his investigation before it exposed my involvement. Did Baxter stop investigating? No. He ignored my instructions and continued documenting maritime imports shipments on his own time. He was building a case to take directly to the Treasury Department, bypassing me entirely. I reported this to Al-Rashid about 3 weeks before Baxter died. What was Al-Rashid's response? Kellerman's voice dropped. He said he'd handle it. He said Baxter was becoming a serious problem and needed to be neutralized before he could file his report. I thought he meant bribed or threatened. I didn't think he meant killed. But you knew Baxter had been killed after the fact? Yes. The Friday morning after Baxter's body was found, Al-Rashid called me. He said the Baxter situation had been resolved permanently and that I should write a letter thanking him for handling it with discretion. He said the letter would ensure we were both equally compromised. If I testified against him, the letter proved I knew about the murder. If he testified against me, he could claim I ordered it. Did you write the letter? Yes, I was terrified. Al-Rashid had just demonstrated he was willing to kill people who threatened the operation. I wrote the letter to protect myself, thinking it would satisfy him and he'd leave me alone. Sullivan leaned forward. Mr. Kellerman, I want you to describe in as much detail as possible what Al-Rashid told you about how Thomas Baxter was killed. Kellerman's hands were shaking visibly now. His lawyer put a hand on his arm, steadying him. Al-Rashid told me that 2 men who work for maritime imports, dock workers named Hassan Farah and Jamil Qasim, were waiting at Pier 42 on Thursday night, October 22nd. Baxter had told his wife he was going to the pier to check something. Al-Rashid said they knew Baxter would be there because they'd sent him an anonymous message claiming there was evidence of smuggling at a specific location on the pier. It was a trap. Yes. When Baxter arrived, Farah and Qasim grabbed him, strangled him with a cord. Al-Rashid said it was quick, and then staged the scene to look like accidental drowning. They poured whiskey down his throat to create the appearance of intoxication. They planted pearls from a recent shipment in his pocket to make him look like a corrupt inspector who'd stolen contraband. Then they threw his body in the East River near Pier 42, knowing it would be found quickly and that the medical examiner would likely rule accidental drowning. Al-Rashid described this to you in detail. Yes, he was proud of it. He said it was a perfect plan. Get rid of Baxter, destroy his credibility, and ensure the police wouldn't investigate further. He was right about the police part. They closed the case within hours. Do Farah and Qasim still work for maritime imports? I don't know. After the searches and arrests, I assume they've fled or gone into hiding. Sullivan made more notes, then shifted topics. Tell me about Nazarian. Who is he? and what was his role in the operation? Aram Nazarian owns maritime imports. He's Lebanese, lives part-time in Beirut and part-time in New York. He's the one who established the smuggling operation. He has connections in the Persian Gulf who source natural pearls, connections in Lebanon who facilitate shipping, and connections in New York who distribute the pearls through auction houses and dealers. Al-Rashid was operational manager. I facilitated customs, but Nazarian was the architect and primary beneficiary. How much money did Nazarian make from the smuggling? I don't know exactly, but Al-Rashid once mentioned that Nazarian was clearing over $1 million annually from pearl smuggling alone. Maritime imports had other business, legitimate cargo, textiles, some machinery, but the pearls were the most profitable product line. Did Nazarian order Baxter's murder? I don't know for certain. Al-Rashid never said explicitly, but Al-Rashid wouldn't have made that decision independently. He always consulted Nazarian on major problems. My assumption is that Nazarian approved the murder. Al-Rashid arranged it, and Farah and Qasim carried it out. The questioning continued for another 2 hours, covering every detail of the smuggling operation, the financial arrangements, the communication methods, and the timeline of events leading to Baxter's murder. By the time Sullivan finished, she had a complete record of Kellerman's knowledge and involvement. Mr. Kellerman, you understand that your testimony today will be used to prosecute Karim al-Rashid for murder, conspiracy, customs fraud, and related charges. You understand that you'll be required to testify at trial and face cross-examination by al-Rashid's defense attorneys. I understand. And you understand that if we discover you've lied or omitted material facts from this statement, the cooperation agreement becomes void, and you'll face the full range of charges without any sentencing consideration. I understand. Everything I've said is true. After the statement concluded, and Kellerman was led back to custody, I spoke briefly with Sullivan. That's solid testimony. Al-Rashid is finished. If Kellerman holds up under cross-examination, defense attorneys will attack his credibility. He's a confessed corrupt official who's testifying to save himself from longer prison time. But combined with the physical evidence and the documentary proof, it's enough for conviction. Al-Rashid will spend the rest of his life in prison. What about Farah and Qasim, the actual killers? We've got warrants for their arrest. They haven't been seen since the maritime import search, probably fled to Lebanon or elsewhere in the Middle East. If we catch them, they'll face murder charges. If we don't, at least we got the people who ordered the killing. I returned to the brownstone at 6 o'clock, with a complete transcript of Kellerman's statement. Wolfe read it carefully while Fritz prepared dinner. Grilled lamb chops with mint sauce, roasted potatoes, and fresh vegetables. After finishing the transcript, Wolfe set it aside and picked up the strand of pearls one final time. Kellerman's testimony provides everything we needed, Archie. Motive, method, opportunity, and direct knowledge of Al-Rashid's confession to the murder. Combined with the physical evidence and the documentary proof of smuggling, Al-Rashid's conviction is virtually certain. What about Nazarian? He's beyond our reach unless he returns to American jurisdiction. The international warrant will remain active indefinitely, but realistically, he's escaped prosecution. He'll continue operating smuggling enterprises from Beirut, perhaps more carefully, perhaps with different merchandise. But Archie Wolfe looked at me seriously. We've accomplished what Mrs. Baxter hired us to accomplish. We proved her husband was murdered, identified his killers, and ensured they'll face justice. We can't solve every crime or punish every criminal. Sometimes partial justice is all that's achievable. It still feels incomplete. Justice often does. The perfect resolution exists only in fiction. In reality, we settle for what we can prove, what we can prosecute, and what serves the interests of the victims. Mrs. Baxter has truth, vindication for her husband's reputation, and the satisfaction of knowing his killers are in custody. That's not perfect, but it's substantially better than the alternative, which was his death remaining classified as accidental, and his reputation destroyed by planted evidence. The phone rang. I answered. Goodwin residence. Mr. Goodwin, this is Helen Baxter. Inspector Kramer called me this afternoon with an update. He said Arthur Kellerman has confessed to everything and provided testimony that will convict the people who killed Thomas. Is that true? It's true. Kellerman gave a complete statement describing the smuggling operation and Al-Rashid's role in arranging your husband's murder. Al-Rashid will be prosecuted for homicide, and Kellerman will serve time for his involvement. The case is resolved, Mrs. Baxter. Her voice broke slightly. Thank you. Thank you for not giving up, for believing me when the police didn't, for finding the truth. Thomas he'd be grateful. Your husband was a brave man who died doing the right thing, making sure people know that truth was the least we could do. After hanging up, I relayed the conversation to Wolfe. He nodded slowly. The victim's family has closure. That's the ultimate measure of success in these matters, Archie. Not the elegance of the deduction or the cleverness of the investigation, but whether the people left behind receive truth and justice. We've provided both. That evening, Fritz served an exceptional dinner, and Wolfe ate with visible satisfaction. Not just because the food was excellent, but because the case had reached a morally acceptable conclusion. Criminals in custody, evidence documented, testimony secured, victim vindicated. After dinner, I made my evening rounds. The dogs had fully relaxed from their elevated alert status, Caesar and Mars at their normal posts, Apollo's pacing returned to routine, Minerva settled comfortably on the stairs, Diana quiet in the basement. Loyal remained under my desk, but his posture was completely relaxed now. He knew, with whatever mysterious sense dogs possess, that the danger had passed and normal life had resumed. Through the bulletproof windows, West 35th Street was settling into Friday evening. Somewhere in federal custody, Arthur Kellerman was beginning a 5 to 7 year sentence that would destroy his career and reputation, but leave him alive. Somewhere in the same facility, Karim al-Rashid was facing life in prison for murder and conspiracy. Somewhere in Beirut, Aram Nazarian was temporarily free, but living with the knowledge that an international warrant would follow him forever, limiting his travel and constraining his operations. And somewhere in New York, Helen Baxter was finally able to grieve her husband properly, knowing that his death had been avenged and his reputation restored. The case of the pearl smuggler was complete. The pearls, those beautiful, valuable objects that had journeyed from oysters in the Persian Gulf to smuggler's cargo to a dead man's pocket to evidence in a murder trial, had served their final purpose. Justice. Imperfect, incomplete, but real. 3 months later, on a cold February morning, I sat in the federal courthouse, watching the conclusion of United States v. Karim al-Rashid. The trial had lasted 2 weeks. The prosecution had presented Kellerman's testimony, the shipping manifests, the financial records, the letter thanking al-Rashid for resolving the Baxter situation, and expert testimony from Leonard Driscoll about pearl authentication. The defense had attacked Kellerman's credibility, claimed the smuggling operation was exaggerated, and argued that al-Rashid had no knowledge of any plot to kill Thomas Baxter. The jury hadn't believed them. After 6 hours of deliberation, they returned verdicts. Guilty on all counts: conspiracy to commit murder, conspiracy to smuggle, customs fraud, witness intimidation. The judge sentenced al-Rashid to life in prison without possibility of parole. Arthur Kellerman, who'd testified for the prosecution as agreed, received 7 years in federal prison with possibility of parole after 5. Hassan Farah and Jamil Qasim, the 2 dock workers who'd actually strangled Thomas Baxter, remained fugitives, believed to be in Lebanon beyond the reach of American law enforcement. Aram Nazarian remained in Beirut, the international warrant unenforced, the architect of the operation unpunished except by the loss of his New York smuggling network. Imperfect justice, but justice nonetheless. After the sentencing, I met Helen Baxter outside the courthouse. She looked different than she had 3 months ago, still grieving, but no longer destroyed by it. The truth had freed her to mourn properly and begin moving forward. Mr. Goodwin, thank you for being here. It helps to know that people who cared about Thomas saw justice done. Wolfe would have been here if he could travel. He doesn't leave the brownstone, but he follows every case to its conclusion in spirit, if not in person. Please thank him for me. The pearls, the ones that were found with Thomas, I sold them last month. $14,000. I've established a scholarship at Thomas's old university for students studying criminal justice. It's called the Thomas Baxter Memorial Scholarship for Ethics in Law Enforcement. Every year, a student who demonstrates exceptional integrity will receive funding for their education. Thomas would approve of that. I hope so. The pearls came from crime, but now they'll fund something good. That feels right. I returned to the brownstone at 3 o'clock to find Wolfe in the office with his orchid records and a bottle of beer. He looked up when I entered. Verdict? Guilty on all counts. Life without parole for al-Rashid. 7 years for Kellerman. Farah and Qasim still at large, Nazarian still in Beirut. Imperfect but adequate. And Mrs. Baxter, she sold the pearls and established a scholarship in her husband's name. She's transforming tragedy into something constructive. She's going to be all right. Wolfe nodded slowly. Good. The case is truly closed then, not just legally but morally. The guilty are punished, the victim is vindicated, and his legacy serves a positive purpose. That's as close to perfect resolution as these matters ever achieve. I sat at my desk where Loyal immediately appeared, and settled at my feet. His notched ear and scarred face reminded me, as always, that loyalty and courage sometimes required walking 200 miles through wilderness to deliver a message of justice. Archie, Wolfe said, what's your assessment of the case? Not the investigation mechanics, but the moral dimension. I thought about it. Thomas Baxter was a customs inspector who earned $5,000 a year and discovered a smuggling operation worth millions. He could have taken a bribe and looked the other way. Instead, he documented everything and prepared to expose it, knowing it would put him in danger. He died because he chose integrity over compromise. That's heroism. And the criminals? Kellerman was a bureaucrat who chose money over duty. He facilitated smuggling, enabled murder, and only cooperated when facing consequences. He'll serve 5 years and probably live comfortably afterward on whatever money he hid. That's not justice, that's pragmatism. But without his testimony, al-Rashid might have walked free, so it's acceptable pragmatism. And al-Rashid? A killer who arranged murder to protect profit. He'll die in prison, which is exactly what he deserves. That's justice. What about Nazarian and the 2 actual killers? They escaped. They escaped prosecution, not justice. Nazarian lives in Beirut under an international warrant that limits his movements and operations. Farah and Qasim live as fugitives, always looking over their shoulders, never able to return home or live openly. That's not formal justice, but it's a form of punishment. Wolfe picked up his beer glass, studied it in the afternoon light. I once told you that justice is incremental, Archie. We solve one case at a time, collect one debt at a time, punish one criminal at a time. We can't solve every crime or punish every guilty party, but we can ensure that some crimes are solved, some debts are collected, and some criminals face consequences. That's our work. That's all it can ever be. It's enough? It's what we have, and sometimes, as in this case, it's sufficient to vindicate the innocent, punish the guilty, and provide closure to those left behind. Mrs. Baxter has truth. Baxter's reputation is restored. Al-Rashid is in prison. That's not perfect, but it's substantially better than the alternative. The phone rang. I answered. Goodwin residence. Mr. Goodwin, this is Bernard Holloway. I wanted to inform you that my auction house has established new authentication protocols for all pearl sales, requiring complete provenance documentation and independent verification of origin. We're also cooperating with Treasury Department to review all past sales for potential smuggled merchandise. I thought Mr. Wolfe would want to know that something positive came from this investigation beyond the criminal convictions. He'll appreciate that. You're making it harder for smugglers to use legitimate businesses as distribution channels. That's the goal. I also wanted to thank you and Mr. Wolfe for treating me as a witness rather than a criminal. I was naive about where those pearls came from, but I wasn't malicious. You gave me a chance to cooperate rather than face prosecution. I won't forget that. After hanging up, I relayed this to Wolfe. He nodded with what might have been satisfaction. Holloway learned from the experience and implemented reforms. That's more valuable than punishing him for unknowing participation. When criminals are punished and honest people learn from mistakes, the system improves incrementally. That's how justice functions in reality, not through dramatic revelations and perfect resolutions, but through slow accumulation of small improvements. That evening, Fritz prepared a special dinner. Oysters Rockefeller, grilled Dover sole, roasted vegetables, and a particularly excellent white burgundy. It was a celebration of the case's conclusion, though Wolfe would never call it that. He preferred acknowledgement of satisfactory resolution. Over dinner we talked about other things. Orchid cultivation, upcoming auctions Wolfe was interested in, whether the Dodgers would repeat their World Series victory, Fritz's plans for the spring garden. The case was closed, filed away, finished. But as I looked at the jade dragon that still sat on Wolfe's desk, the gift from Mei Lin Fong after the Fisherman's Wharf case. I thought about how objects could carry meaning beyond their material value. That dragon represented a murdered fisherman and the justice his widow had received. The pearls we'd returned to Helen Baxter represented her husband and the scholarship that would carry his name forward. Objects became symbols, symbols became legacy, and legacy, the memory of those who died pursuing justice, and the work of those who ensured that pursuit wasn't in vain. That was what made the work meaningful. Archie, Wolfe said, interrupting my thoughts. You're being philosophical. It's uncharacteristic and slightly concerning. Just thinking about pearls and justice, how something beautiful can come from irritation if you give it enough time and layers of work. That's actually a reasonable metaphor. Pearls form through oysters responding to irritation by secreting nacre, layer upon layer, until something beautiful emerges. Justice forms through investigators responding to crime by accumulating evidence, layer upon layer, until truth emerges. Both processes are slow, methodical, and produce results that couldn't exist without patience and persistence. You're getting philosophical too. I'm acknowledging patterns. It's different. He finished his wine. But yes, Archie, there's something aesthetically satisfying about the pearl metaphor. Crime is the irritant, investigation is the nacre, and justice is the pearl. Not perfect, not flawless, but real and valuable nonetheless. After dinner, I made my final rounds of the brownstone for what felt like the last time on this case. The dogs were at their normal positions, Caesar and Mars at the front, Apollo at the rear, Minerva on the stairs, Diana in the basement, Loyal under my desk. The fortress was secure. The case was closed. Life had returned to normal. Through the bulletproof windows, I could see February snow beginning to fall on West 35th Street, coating the city in white, making everything look clean and new. Somewhere in federal prison, Karim al-Rashid was beginning a life sentence. Somewhere else in federal prison, Arthur Kellerman was serving time for corruption and conspiracy. Somewhere in Lebanon, 3 fugitives lived under the shadow of international warrants and the knowledge that they could never return home. And somewhere in New York, a widow was moving forward with her life, sustained by truth, justice, and the knowledge that her husband had died a hero rather than a corrupt drunk. The case of the pearl smuggler was complete. The pearls, those beautiful objects that had journeyed from ocean depths to criminal enterprise, to murder weapon, to evidence, to scholarship fund, had completed their transformation from instruments of greed to instruments of justice. And Nero Wolfe, the genius who never left his chair but solved murders from behind bulletproof windows guarded by 6 loyal dogs, had once again demonstrated that geography was irrelevant, that obstacles were surmountable, and that justice, however imperfect, however delayed, was achievable through methodical deduction and persistent investigation. The work continued. New cases would come. New crimes would demand solution. But for now, for this cold February evening in a secure brownstone on West 35th Street, the work was done. Justice had been served. And that was enough.